Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to the CEC 15 February 28th, 2023 calendar meeting. I am Camille Cassaretti, the president of CEC 15, and I would like to call this meeting to order at 6:35 p.m. I just want to note that we are remote only this evening. But before we call the roll, I want to invite our interpreters to introduce themselves in their languages. So we have Spanish, Mandarin, and Bangla. Would the Spanish interpreter please start?
Good evening. This message is going to be in Spanish, offering interpretation services. Buenas noches, bienvenidos. Si desean escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor, marque desde su teléfono el 347-966-4114 e ingrese el código de conferencia 270-298-878, símbolo numeral. Una vez más, para escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor, marque desde su teléfono el número 347-966-4114 e ingrese el código de conferencia 270-298-878 sin numeral. Por favor, asegúrense de poner sus dispositivos en silencio para evitar sonido de fondo, para que nos permitan una interpretación más clara. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And would the Mandarin interpreter please introduce yourself?
大家晚上好，如果你想收听华语翻译，请拨入电话号码347-966-4114，并输入密码816-774-294，然后按井字。如果你想收听华语翻译，同时留在这个用户仪式上，以便在电脑上收看会议，请把你的电脑和电话都调到静音，然后在你的电话上说会议专线。重复一次，电话号码是347-966-4114，密码是816-774-294，然后按井字。Thank you.
Thank you so much. If someone wouldn't mind just dropping all of those phone numbers and ID numbers in the chat, that would be great. I'm having trouble copying and pasting here. And so I'd like to invite the Bangla interpreter to please introduce yourself.
Thank you everyone. বাংলা ভাইদের জন্য আজকে সন্ধ্যায় সিএসসি মিটিং এ আপনাদের স্বাগতম। আপনারা যদি এই মিটিং এর পাশাপাশি বাংলায় শুনতে চান সেক্ষেত্রে ডায়াল করুন 347-966-4114। আমি আবার বলছি, বাংলায় শুনতে ডায়াল করুন 347-966-4114 এবং একটি কোড দিন 734-249-436 এবং হ্যাশ চাপুন। কোডটি আবার বলছি 734-249-436 এবং হ্যাশ চাপুন। তো নাম্বারটি ডায়াল করার পরে এই কোডটি চেপে হ্যাশ চাপবেন। ধন্যবাদ সবাইকে। থ্যাংক ইউ এভরিওয়ান।
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have all of you here today. So I'm going to go ahead and call the roll, and I just want to let everyone know that there are two council members that are asking for excused absences.
রোল কল করব। আমি আপনাদেরকে জানাতে চাই আমাদের কাউন্সিল মেম্বার
one of them, Vincent Liu, and the other, Tia Shelsted, both asked for work-related excused absences. Sorry, my mistake. So Antonia is doing double duty here this evening. She's on another call, but she's here with us. I'm here, Camille Cassaretti. As I said, Tia is not going to be here this evening, nor is Vincent. Nana Poku Agiakum.
Present.
Hi, Nana, welcome.
Thank
Is
you.
Alfred Dienschenis here? Would someone mind trying to get in touch with Alfred? He might have gone to the school as well. As I was saying, Joseph is going to be a little bit late. He went to ENS. He did not get the message that we were moving to remote. Yvonne Anda, I believe I saw him on the
Yes,
call.
I'm here. Present.
Hi, Yvonne. Welcome. Thank you for
Present.
being
Thank you.
here. Nancy Randall.
Hi, present.
Hi, Nancy. Vanessa Gonzalez Uyoka.
Present.
Hello, Vanessa. Thank you for being here. Nakia Muhasabran.
I am here.
Hello. Thank you for being here. Okay, great. So we do have quorum. And I'm going to hand the floor over to Nancy, who is going to read the introduction to CEC 15. Nancy will also review the public comment protocol, assuming Joe has not arrived yet. And then we are going to move right into the Fair Student Funding presentation from Superintendent Alvarez. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the District 15 Community Education Council meeting tonight. We appreciate your time and are glad you could join us. For those of you who are new to CEC meetings, there are 32 CECs throughout the city, plus 4 citywide councils. Each CEC represents a community school district, and each is made up of 11 volunteer members, 9 of whom are elected by parents in the district. The remaining members are appointed by the Brooklyn Borough President, and we have 1 high school student member. CEC 15 is a state-mandated public body responsible for ensuring that public school parents and the public have input in educational decisions that are made at the school district level. Our council reviews education policies and advocates for high-quality education that benefit all of our District 15 public elementary and middle school students. CEC 15 serves 35 elementary and middle schools and 1 high school under the oversight of our superintendent. CEC members serve in an advisory role on education matters to the district superintendent, the chancellor of the Department of Education, and to state and city elected officials. We approve district school zoning lines submitted by the Department of Education. We evaluate our district superintendent. We review the district's educational programs, and we support school leadership teams. We also submit recommendations for the School Construction Authority's annual capital plan. And as of recent amendments to the law, CECs advise in the selection of parent coordinators. We actively seek input and feedback from the public and encourage you to visit our website, cecd15.org. Take a look at our Facebook page, connect with us on Twitter, and write to us about any issues you may want to address or learn about. Each school has a CEC liaison. All of our names and contact information are available on our website. Please sign the attendance sheet, which will be dropped in the chat if it hasn't been dropped already. And I'll continue, if Joe has not arrived, with our public comment protocol. The mayor has extended his local state of emergency to address the COVID-19 pandemic through March 21st, 2023. In accordance, tonight's meeting is taking place remotely and will include a public comment period. We will take remote comments to gather additional feedback from our families and school community members. You may leave your camera on, or for your privacy, if you prefer, you may use audio only during the comment period and throughout the meeting. The rules of engagement. When you comment, please respect the privacy of others. Please do not include names of children or staff. Guests who make inappropriate comments will be removed from the meeting. During the public comment period, those attending may raise their hand to comment or indicate in the chat that they would like to speak. Those called upon will be unmuted. Speakers will be called on one at a time and will be allowed 1 minute each for comment. We will hear as many speakers as the time allows. It is possible that not every comment or question will be given time, so the best way to get your question answered is always to write to the CEC at cec15@schools.nyc.gov. CEC members will also be given a comment period. Members will be called upon by roll call and are permitted 1 2-minute comment or question. If members do not have a comment, they may cede their time to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Without further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Superintendent Rafael Alvarez for the Fair Student Funding presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, President Casaretti. Nicole, if you can just put the PowerPoint on the share screen.
Absolutely. If you could just please grant me access to share my screen. Thank you.
Camille, if I do speak fast as I normally do, can you just nod me or wave at me to slow down? Because I know I'm going to go fast and they're going to ask.
I'll do my best. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nicole, do you have access?
I do, but since I brought a new computer home and I wasn't preparing for it, it's not set up.
I'll put it out. I'll put it up. Just make sure you throw in what needs to be for the slides. Okay. I will do this. This new version is very strange, but okay. I'm sharing my screen. Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So first, welcome to the annual school budgets engagement sessions. As you know, I'm Superintendent Alvarez, and I'm happy to be here with you on our district budget representative and our district budget representative, Larita Moy, who really supports all of our schools directly with the matters related to budget. Every spring, the panel of educational policy votes on the DOE budget allocation formula for the following fiscal year. In preparation for this event, superintendents and borough-based support staff present the DOE's proposed Fair Student Funding budget allocations for fiscal year 2024 to all community and citywide education councils. The purpose of today's presentation is to review the DOE's budget and allocation formula, review Fair Student Funding, and the proposed changes for fiscal year 2024. Which aligns with the 2023-2024 school year. This presentation actually marks a new approach to how New York City Public Schools is conducting community engagement around our school budgets and any proposed changes to the Fair Student Funding formula. Our goal is to increase our transparency in ensuring that you, as critical community stakeholders, are made aware of how schools are funded and made aware of the resources available to you to better understand your school's budgets. Our new approach is a change that was one of a few recommendations made by the Fair Student Funding Working Group. Camille Casaretti was one of those members, so we thank her for that. That convened in July 2022 at the request of the Chancellor. The Fair Student Funding Working Group worked over the course of 4 months in partnership with national school finance experts and our own finance team to deeply understand the current Fair Student Funding formula, look at New York City school demographics, and make recommendations for changes to the formula. The working group included a wide range of stakeholders, including CEC members, as I stated to you before, PEP members, union leaders, advocates, parents, and elected officials. The working group published a report in November 2022 to make recommendations to the Chancellor for changes to the formula, which he considered and determined a few recommendations to move forward with. We will be discussing those changes in this presentation shortly. In addition to recommendations to change the formula, the working group also asked that we work intentionally to better engage the community about our school budgeting, the Fair Student Funding formula, and how money to schools is allocated within the formula. This presentation makes a shift in our approach and demonstrates our commitment to the recommendations of the working group to focus on our transparency and community engagement. And so at this time, Nicole Lanzaletto is our deputy superintendent, is putting a link for you all to be able to see on InfoHub the financial data and reports. Please note that the CEC presentation for tonight's meeting is posted at the link I just shared that Nicole is placing in the chat, along with translated versions of the deck. The posted version online does not include the district-specific slides, since all CECs are doing this presentation before the April PEP meeting. However, we can share the district-specific slide with the CEC to share with you all, if anyone would like the district-specific slide. I appreciate joining this meeting tonight, and to dive into this presentation, now we're going to move on to the agenda. Today, I'm going to discuss three main topics: sharing an overview of this year's overall New York City Public Schools budget, providing a detailed explanation of the Fair Student Funding Formula, and discussing the proposed changes to the Fair Student Funding Formula for the 23-24 school year. If you have any questions during the presentation, I'm going to ask you to direct them to the chat. We will have team members ready to respond to these questions. Questions that they are not able to answer during the presentation will be collected and shared with the New York City Public Schools team, who will then respond, and I will share back with the group. Additionally, the intention of this session is to collect public comments on our proposed changes. We ask that if you have specific feedback on the proposed changes to the Fair Student Funding Formula, that you please feel free to share that feedback with, and I'm going to ask Nicole to please put the email address that's there. It's budgetpubliccomments, all one word, at schools.nyc.gov. If you could throw that in the chat as well, Nicole. Our New York City Public Schools team will be taking public comments received at this email address into consideration in the coming weeks. On one final note about the presentation, while I will be providing an overview of our overall New York City Public Schools budget and our district budget, I will not be reviewing our individual schools' budget. Those are accessible on our public website. This slide shows you the steps to find the school budget from our homepage. I'm going to give you a minute to use this information to load your school-specific budget if you choose, if you're interested. You're going to go on schools.nyc.gov. Step 1, you're going to choose a school, which is connected to the first arrow where on the top left where it says find a school. Step 2, once you find your school, you're going to select the reports tab. Once you've identified the reports tab, you're going to go and scroll. And on the right corner, you're going to see an arrow that's going to be where it says budgets and finances. You're going to push that button where it says budget and finances, and it's going to open more tabs. Under those tabs, you can review the following reports: Fair Student Funding Overview and Detail, Galaxy Allocation, Budget Summary, and Expenditure Report. For today's purposes, we're looking at the Fair Student Funding Overview and Detail. I'm going to give a minute for everyone to just look at that. Okay. If you're having trouble, please share in the chat. As I stated before, there are members to support people who need the support around this. And now I'm going to provide an overview of our overall budget and where the funding comes from. Our total budget for the 2022-2023 school year is $37.6 billion, or about $31,000 per student in our system. New York City provides most of our funding. For the 2022-2023 school year, the city contributed $20 billion, or 54% of our total budget. Most of our funding from the city comes from what we call city tax levy dollars. city tax levy funds are drawn from local taxes, including property taxes, sales taxes, and personal income taxes. Every year, the mayor proposes the amount of city tax levy funding we get, and the city council must pass that budget into law. $13 billion, or roughly 36%, comes from New York State funding. New York State is our second largest source of funding. For the 22-23 school year, the state will contribute $13 billion, or roughly 36% of our total budget. Every year, the governor proposes the amount of state funding that we will get, mainly based on the number and types of students enrolled in our schools. And then the state legislator must pass the budget into law. Funding generally comes from income and corporate taxes, as well as property and sales taxes. Federal funding comprises a total of $4 billion of our funding for this school year. The federal government is our third largest source of funding. The federal government gets its funding mainly from income taxes. Every year, Congress proposes a budget and the president must sign the budget into law. And every student succeeds that provides the rules for allocating most of the federal funding we receive. For the 2022-2023 school year, the federal government will contribute $2 billion, or roughly 5% of our total budget, as well as an additional $2 billion, or another 5% of our budget, in temporary federal stimulus funding. How is New York City's public schools budget spent? In the previous slide, we covered an overview of where New York City Public School receives its funding from, and now we're going to shift into how that funding is spent in our schools and across our system. I know I have to slow down, right, Camille? No, we're good? All right. The largest proportion of our budget is allocated towards K-12 schools and instruction. We allocate $15.1 billion, or roughly 46% of our overall budget, annually to support our schools, including health and school climate initiatives, special education, and other operating expenses. Most of the instructional dollars, which is over $15 billion this year, are controlled at the school level. With our budget, we have mandated costs that must be covered annually, including employee benefits, pensions, and debts, as well as state mandated payments to charter schools, non-public, and contract schools. We allocate $2 billion to support early childhood across the city. Finally, our superintendent field offices and central offices comprise just 2% of our overall budget. K-12 allocations are all dollars given directly to district schools, in addition to associated fringes and pension costs, under the oversight of principals and superintendents, obviously. School budgets are used for all instructional expenses at the DOE, and $15.1 billion in school budgets pay for costs, including salaries and benefits for classroom teachers, classroom paraprofessionals, principals, assistant principals, and deans, and other classroom and school-based staff. This also includes funding for textbooks, computers, materials, and supplies. The school operations section pays for non-instructional services that students receive. The $4.3 billion is used to pay for costs, including free breakfast and lunch available to all students, bus routes, loan payments on buildings, whether it's new construction and renovated buildings. This is similar to mortgage payments, essentially. Now, public and contract school payments cover schools and programs that educate New York City students but are not directly run by the New York City Department of Ed. The $2 billion includes charter schools, students with disabilities attending specialized schools, supplemental services to students attending non-public schools. And then the employee benefits, pension, and debt package covers $10 billion, and that pays for healthcare and other employment benefits, pension payments for staff, and debt payments on loans for school construction and upgrades. Now we're going to look at the financial breakdown for our district, District 15, pre-K to 12 for the 2022-2023 school year budget total. Again, this will not cover the breakdown by schools. You can find that information where I shared with you earlier today. You're going to go to schools.nyc.gov. You're going to choose a school, select the reports tab, open budget and finances, and review reports. That includes fair student funding overall in detail, Galaxy allocation, budget summary, and expenditure reports. As you can see in District 15, we have a $373 million budget across 50 pre-K to 12 schools, serving 26,280 students, including pre-K centers. This does not include the District 75, since those programs are not funded through fair student funding. School budgets are comprised of a mix of fair student funding and other funding sources. Pre-K centers are not funded with fair student funding. Important to note that these 50 schools also include the high schools across our district. Who decides how the money is spent at the school level? Once this funding is in place within school budgets, principals are responsible for the funds allocated to schools and have a great deal of flexibility in how they spend their funding. These choices are made in partnership with school leadership teams, or what you all know it as SLTs. As principals and SLTs create the school's comprehensive education plan, the CEP, they identify school-specific instructional needs and priorities and align the school budget to this plan. Principals work with their SLTs to create the school's budget in alignment to the goals and instructional priorities outlined in the CEP. Superintendents like myself supervise all principals in our district through this process and must approve all school budgets and their alignment with the school's CEP. This work across our district is very specific. As I've stated before when I first joined, one of our goals this year is to really hone in our marginalized students across our district. So we are being extra careful with schools focusing on trying to support the needs of those particular students that have historically been marginalized over periods of time and addressing those gaps and trying to close those gaps, which I'm proud to say that we've been able to start seeing some of that work as we've been getting our middle of the year assessment data back. What is fair student funding? Well, fair student funding, sometimes referred to as FSF, is the largest funding stream that we provide to schools. As discussed on the previous slide, the allocation of fair student funding provided to schools is based on the number of students enrolled at each school and the specific needs of those students. What make these calculations based on fair student funding's formula, which calculates how we distribute this overall pot of money to schools. Within the formula, students with needs that require more support receive more funding in alignment with those specific needs. As indicated in previous slides, fair student funding is a significant proportion of schools' budgets. In fact, these funds account for nearly 2/3 of most K-12 New York City public school budgets. In many cases, schools also receive funding from other funding streams, including federal funding streams like Title I, Title III, IDEA, which is funding focused on special education, Title III, just so that you know, is funding for ENL, or other targeted allocations for specific initiatives. Those pots make up the remaining funding within the overall school budgets. As a note, charter schools, 3K and pre-K, and District 75 programs are funded outside of the fair student funding formula. Additionally, mandated IEP-related services, including speech teachers, occupational therapists, and physical therapists, as well as one-to-one paraprofessionals, are also funded outside of fair student funding formula. Again, the money provided to schools from the fair student funding allocation provides principals with significant flexibility, working in partnership with their SLTs to utilize the funding to design instructional programs tailored to the need of their students within their school community. Funding from the Fair Student Funding allocation provides for each school's basic instructional program and classroom services. This funding can be used to pay for classroom teachers, including arts, gym, and cluster teachers at the elementary level, as well as school leadership, guidance counselors, school social workers, and administrative and pupil personnel support staff. Additionally, the Fair Student Funding allocation can pay for after-school programs, tutoring and intervention programs, as well as teacher absent coverages and classroom resources and materials. How does Fair Student Funding work? I want to use this opportunity now to further kind of clarify some of what we've already discussed. Throughout this presentation, we've been talking about Fair Student Funding and the Fair Student Funding formula. When we say Fair Student Funding, we're talking about the money that's allocated to K-12 schools from this large pot, not including pre-K centers or District 75 programs. This year, the Fair Student Funding pot is $7 billion. The Fair Student Funding formula is the method by which we decide how to allocate that funding to schools. This slide outlines the formula and how we utilize the formula to calculate the total amount of Fair Student Funding that each school receives. Now I'm going to walk you through how we utilize the formula to determine how much Fair Student Funding each school receives and how we determine that specific dollar amount. Please note, the foundation plus the collective bargaining plus the first per capita times students and their needs is how we determine the Fair Student Funding allocation. Off the top, each school receives a foundational amount of $225,000 annually. This is a baseline funding allocation that is provided to every school, regardless of the number of students that the school serves. Next, we add funding for collective bargaining related costs, which is contractual pay increases for school staff. Then we calculate the remainder of the Fair Student Funding by allocating a base amount for each student per capita, and then allocating additional funding based on each student's identified educational needs and instructional programs. It is in this part of the formula that we take into account the weights, and I'll put that in quote, weights, that we have been referring to throughout the presentation. On the next slide, we're going to dive more deeply into the weights that we utilize to determine the specific dollar amount that we allocate per student so that you have a clear understanding of what goes into this part of the formula. I also want to pause here to reiterate that within this formula, we take the time to examine the individual needs of each student to determine funding allocations. We make these individualized calculations for each student, aligned to their individual and specific needs and educational program to determine how much funding will be provided to that school for each student. Now, to look more deeply and understand the current weights that we use to calculate the last part of the formula from the previous slide. Remember, this is the 2022-2023 Fair Student Funding Weights formula. On this slide are the Fair Student Funding weights for this year. Here, you can see the different types of weights that students can be eligible to receive based on their instructional needs or academic programs. Again, these are the weights for this current year. In previous slides, we mentioned that Fair Student Funding Working Group has made recommendations for changes to the Fair Student Funding formula. This is the area where they made recommendations for changes. Later on in this presentation, we will show a very similar chart that indicates weight changes that we are proposing for the next school year of 2023-2024 fiscal year 24, made as a result of the Fair Student Funding Working Group. Now I will explain the different weights on this slide. For 2022-2023, the base weight of 1.00 was equal to approximately $4,197 per capita. This per capita is adjusted annually to reflect changes in the citywide average teacher salary. The base grade weight is allocated to schools for all students on their audited October 31st register and is calculated by considering instructional program requirements by student grade level with distinct weights for K to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 12. Why does 6 to 8 have a heavier weight than high school grade bands? The elementary school weight is set at the primary weight of 1.00, and it serves as a starting point for the calculation of the subsequent fair student funding weights. Middle school students carry the largest weight due to the evidence of large drop-off in student achievement and greater average social emotional needs, as well as a higher teacher cost factors. As middle school teachers are entitled to a preparation period and a professional or administrative activity period, 1.4 middle school teachers are needed to cover each class compared to 1.2 for elementary school classes. High school students in grades 9 to 12 are weighted at a slightly higher level than grades K to 5 for several reasons. Older students tend to have higher costs for non-personnel, such as more costly science materials. They often take electives that break into smaller classes, and their schools often require more administrative personnel. This approach is consistent with our historic funding practices and with practices in other cities. Funding for academic intervention, or many of you know it as AIS, is determined by student academic performance when they enter a school, using test scores from their prior year. For schools where students do not have incoming test scores in the lower grades, such as before students begin taking tests or if they do not have prior test scores, we provide funding based on a student's poverty level. Funding for special education is determined by the percentage of time students spend receiving special education services. For example, we have one weight of students receiving services for less than 20% of their week. Another weight funding students receiving part-time service for up to 59% of their week. And a final weight for students receiving full-time special education services. These special education weights are then also broken out by students' grade level with the specific weighting value, again, determined based on the cost of providing the instructional program. We also provide supplemental funding that supports students who have been declassified as special education students. This funding supports students in their first year transitioning out of special education services through the post-IEP transitional support weight. Funding for English language learners, or also known as ELLs, is allocated based on student grade level, reflecting mandated instructional services, including bilingual and ENL instructional programming. Additionally, we have weights for former ELL students who have achieved proficiency within the past 2 years, indicated using the state designated term commanding. We also provide funding for ELs with students with interrupted formal education status, also known as SIFE. Students with this classification receive their respective ELL weight in addition to the SIFE weight. We also have another category of weights for portfolio high schools. These weights are provided to schools based on the number of students who are involved in these academic programs within each high school. Career and technical weights have different tiers based on their type of career preparation program. Programs that require more resources, such as nursing, agriculture and veterinary, aviation technology, automotive, culinary, etc., require industry-specific equipment, higher level of consumable supplies and materials, student internship requirements that are integral to the program of study, and highly specialized and ongoing industry training for teachers have higher weights to support that actual instructional programming. There are also separate weights for students in specialized academic or specialized audition schools, and for students attending transfer schools. Only students attending high schools are eligible for these weights. How the Fair Student Funding weight works. We just look at all of the weights that students could be eligible to receive within the Fair Student Funding formula allocation. I also shared that as we're calculating that formula for each school, we take into account the instructional needs of each individual student within the school as we determine schools' overall budget allocations. In this slide, we will take a look at how each student's calculation is determined. The different types of weights are indicated by color in the upper right corner of the slide. In order to determine the weight for each student, we evaluate their eligibility for the weight based on data in New York City public school systems that store key information about students. Now we're going to walk you through the process of how Fair Student Funding would be allocated for two students, Sam and Alex, through the Fair Student Funding formula. Sam and Alex are two students who attend an elementary school in our district. The orange section shows the grade weight that they first receive. Because they are elementary students, they are both entitled to the K-5 grade weight of 1.0, again, shown in the graph in orange. If they were middle school students, they would have a weight of 1.08, and if they were high school students, they would receive a weight of 1.03. Both Sam and Alex are classified as English language learners, shown in green. Sam is an elementary school multilingual learner enrolled in a standalone English as a New Language program, ENL program. Therefore, Sam is entitled to the K-5 ENL weight of 0.40. Alex is also an elementary school multilingual learner, also enrolled in a bilingual program at his school. The school has appropriately coded Alex as enrolled in a bilingual program in the New York City schools scheduling system called STARS. As such, Alex is entitled to the K-5 bilingual weight of 0.44. Both students are students with disabilities requiring special education classroom instruction of special education teacher support services, also known as SETS, special class, also known as SC, or integrated co-teaching, which many have been known to know it as ICT classes. Sam's IEP, individual education plan, requires less than 20% of Sam's instructional program to be in an IEP setting. Therefore, Sam is entitled to the less than 20% special education weight of 0.56, shown in yellow. Alex's individual education plan IEP is between 21% and 59% of Alex's instructional program to be spent in an IEP setting. Therefore, Alex is entitled to the 21 to 59% special education weight of 1.25, shown in yellow. Both students are students in poverty. Therefore, they're entitled to the Fair Student Funding academic intervention weight of 0.12, shown in blue. When you add all the pieces together, Sam's allocation through the Fair Student Funding would total a weight of 2.08, while Alex's allocation total will be 2.81. Because each weight of 1.0 is equal to $4,197, Sam's weight of 2.08 is equal to approximately $8,700. While Alex's weight is 2.81 is equal to approximately $11,800 under the Fair Student Funding. And now we're going to go into great depth of the overall New York City Public Schools budget for the current school year, as well as the current Fair Student Funding formula. I'm going to review what is ahead for the next fiscal year, 2024, which aligns with the 2023-2024 school year. Improving Fair Student Funding, one of two. There are some common misconceptions around the Fair Student Funding formula and how it allocates resources to schools and students. Our analysis shows that by and large, the Fair Student Funding formula is very effective at directing more resources to students that actually have greater needs. As noted on the slide, through the Fair Student Funding formulas, our schools with the highest share of students in poverty receive 26% more per capita funding than our schools with the lowest share of students in poverty. Further, our analyses show that similar patterns exist for students in temporary housing, students with disabilities, and English language learners. And while our data show that the way we calculate Fair Student Funding allocations through the Fair Student Funding formula is equitable, we do believe that improvements can be made to the Fair Student Funding formula. As discussed briefly early in the presentation, in the summer of 2022, the Fair Student Funding Working Group was formed to respond to Chancellor Banks' request to examine the Fair Student Funding formula and make suggestions for making improvements to it. Over the course of 4 months, the group worked in partnership with national experts and our New York City Public Schools team to analyze and identify a series of recommended changes to the formula, as well as aligned policy recommendations. The working group was tasked with reviewing and making recommendations relating to the Fair Student Funding formula, including the categories, types of students, grade levels, and weights within the formula in order to best meet the needs of students citywide while keeping equity at the core of the work. The working group published a report with recommendations for changes to the formula in November of 2022. All of the working group's materials, including the presentations, the meeting minutes, and the final report are available on our website, and the link is going to be dropped in the chat by Deputy Superintendent Nicole Lanzalato. You're welcome again. The working group published a report with recommendations for changes to the formula in November 2022. And for transparency purposes, all of the working group's materials, including the presentations, meeting minutes, and the final report are available on the website link that has been dropped into the chat. The Chancellor has accepted. The Fair Student Funding Working Group published a report with recommendations for changes to the Fair Student Funding, as well as policy recommendations for how New York City Public Schools could improve Fair Student Funding overall. As a note, some of the public materials published by the working group showed that in some of the models that districts would lose funding as a result of some of the proposals. In our implementation of these new weights, districts and schools will not lose funding as a result of these new weights. Moving forward, the Chancellor has accepted and is proposing 2 changes to the Fair Student Funding formula, which I will now discuss. We are first proposing to add a students in temporary housing weight to the Fair Student Funding formula. This weight would provide additional funding to schools for students who are identified as students in temporary housing. This will mark a significant shift in how we allocate resources to our students. With this specific focus on supporting students who reside in temporary housing, this will have an impact on our asylum-seeking families who are living in temporary housing, provide additional resources to the schools who are taking them in. As you all know, we've been doing a great job across our district in providing supports across our district and working towards supporting our community as one district collectively, because what impacts one impacts us all. And I'm happy to say that in partnership with the CEC, President's Council, and other members of our community, we have been able to really fully engage and support all of our communities and our members. And one example of that is our call to action that we did in December, where we all met at PS 24. Not only did we celebrate, but we were able to provide support across all of our schools for students who were in temporary housing, and as well as asylum seeking students who are actually really new students to our schools. This was the top recommendation from the Fair Student Funding Working Group and is expected to drive $45 million in funding, which is going to be impacting students in temporary housing across all 5 boroughs. We will better understand how much funding we'll be receiving in our district by late spring when initial allocations are released. Secondly, we are proposing to add a concentration weight to the Fair Student Funding formula. The concentration weight would provide additional funding to schools with high populations of students with significant needs. Research shows that schools that serve higher concentration of students with high needs, such as students in poverty, students with disabilities, English language learners, require additional resources to provide robust education and appropriate resources and supports to their students. This weight is expected to drive $45 million in funding to schools in all 5 boroughs and would impact over 300 schools across the city, serving the highest concentration of our neediest students. We will better understand how much funding we'll be receiving in our district, again, by initial allocations later on in the spring. The concentration weights includes factors for proposition of students who are in poverty, consistent with the working group suggestion, and we look at poverty in our weights, students with disabilities, and students who are in temporary housing and other indicators. In addition to changes to the weights outlined in the previous slide, the Chancellor has also accepted additional recommendations from the working group. Moving forward, New York City Public Schools will be prioritizing budget appeals processes to be responsive to special education programming. Throughout the engagement session, the working group shared the critical need for schools to receive funding for all of the programmatic needs of students with disabilities in a general education setting. Understanding that there are changes to special education programs that may be impacted by changing enrollment at schools, we will be prioritizing supporting small schools and schools with high proportions of students with disabilities in the budget appeals process. While this was not a recommendation in the working group's final report, we heard this as a significant issue from many members of the working group and wanted to be responsive to the needs of the group. We will be working as a system to increase our transparency around school budgets. We also heard concerns over a lack of transparency and understanding in how we fund schools, how the formulas works, and the funds are available at the school level. We are taking next steps to address this by being more thoughtful around how we present information to the public and ensure that through presentations and on our website, that information is more accessible to all of our stakeholders, including making significant changes to presentations like this one. In order to decide on which recommendations to choose, we carefully considered the recommendations of the working group and looked closely at the impacts of each recommendation. The working group was clear with their values, that we have more work to do to direct funding to our schools with the greatest needs. We selected these proposals by balancing the values of equity and stability, looking to direct additional resources towards our schools and students with our highest needs, while ensuring that schools do not see disruptions to existing resources. As a note, schools will not lose money as a result of these proposals. We are not reducing any weights to schools to fund this proposal. This chart, similar to the one shown earlier, now includes the proposed new weights for next school year. What is listed here is in the blue highlighted section in the top right hand side table are the proposed changes to the Fair Student Funding weights for the next school year. That means if approved by the Panel for Educational Policy, also known as the PEP, in April, these new weights will be used to calculate the school's Fair Student Funding allocation for the 23-24 school year. If approved by the PEP, there is no impact to the current school year budget. New weights will be calculated and impact schools' budgets by initial allocations for fiscal year 24, school year starting in September. And now here is our timeline for moving forward. In February and March, given initial budget estimates of city and state revenue, New York City school superintendents present the CECs with the proposed Fair Student Funding weights for the coming school year, as I just did. In April and May, the PEP, or the Panel for Educational Policy, votes on the proposed Fair Student Funding weights for the coming school year. In late spring, New York City Public Schools will release budget allocations to schools. In June, principals, along with their school leadership teams, proposed budgets for the coming school year. In July, I and my team will certify alignment between school budgets and comprehensive education plans, or CEPs, for the coming year. And in September, this new school year begins. All public comments will be reviewed by New York City public school teams. Public questions and comments related to the Fair Student Funding Formula will be posted on the Panel for Educational Policy website. Analysis and response of each relevant question and comment will be available for review on the Fair Student Funding website in advance of the April 28th vote. Comments and questions may be directed to the following email address or phone number by April 18th, 2023. Deputy Superintendent Lazzolato will be putting the email address where you could send public comments to budgetpubliccomments@schools.nyc.gov, or you're also welcome to dial 212-374-6754. If we can cut and paste that into the chat, that would be great too, because people can then just click already on the link if they already have something to add. I want to thank you tremendously for your time and attention today. Thank you for sharing your questions throughout the presentation in the chat. We'll be gathering any unanswered questions and sharing back responses within the few days. If you have additional questions that I can support in answering, please reach out to me, my team members who are in the chat, as well as to your CEC, who can direct some of those questions to me as well. And I want to thank you for your time. And at this point, that concludes our discussion, or my presentation, I should say.
So much. Thank you, Superintendent Alvarez. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Nancy, who's filling in for Joe as parliamentarian. I don't think he's joined the call yet. We're going to start with public comment and then the CEC members. Go ahead, Nancy.
Thank you, Camille. If anybody has a question or a comment, could you please raise your hand? We're doing public comments first. So if anybody from the public has a question or a comment, please raise your hand. Okay. Oh, there we go. I see. It's a. Oh, I see. Thank you. I don't see any hands raised. It did say that there were, but now I don't see them. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So I see Johanna. If you could please unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment, you'll have 1 minute.
Hi there. My name is Johanna. I'm a parent of a Parksville Collegiate 8th grader, and I'm also on the Parksville Collegiate SLT. And I know a lot of the people in presenting because I a lot more about budgets than the average bear. But my question about this in particular is I very much appreciate the need for budget transparency, and I'd love to know what that is going to look like, what more budget transparency would mean. Does that mean that that SLTs, for example, in schools will find out the details of mid-year adjustments? And in particular, the question around transparency that I am most curious about is the ratio that is used between the citywide average salary and the base weight, because the presentation said that the base weight is calculated based on the citywide average teacher salary. And so that means that there's a ratio there, which translated to English means how many students does it take to fund a teacher salary? And that, especially given the new class size legislation that's come down, and especially for schools where there might not be a concentration of needs, I think it's really important to know. That's the #1 question on transparency. What is the class size break even? How many students have to be in a class before a school can decide to pay for things like a guidance counselor or a social worker or any sort of enrichment activities. Thanks, and hi to the BCO team.
Rana, do you want to take that question because that's a citywide question?
Sure. Yeah, so we use the current contractual, and I'll confirm this. Johanna, if it's okay, I will just get back to President Kezzarati that we use the contractual numbers for the average teacher salary calculations.
Thank you. And now we'll move to Carlos Horn. Carlos, if you could please unmute yourself and ask your question, and welcome to the meeting tonight.
Yes, thank you. And hello, Superintendent. My question is, how does the addition of the proposed new weights not reduce funding to others?
Can I take that too? So right now we are looking at all the incoming revenue from the state, the city, and what we have remaining of the stimulus dollars. And based on the incoming revenues, we are making those calculations, and we will have the finalized proposals. Again, we're in the throes of that, right? And then also doing full calculations on the enrollment projections for the incoming students and classes and grades. And so all of that is happening right now as we speak with our team. That includes the last installment of the foundation aid as well. So all in, we're taking a look at the budget for fiscal year 24, and we'll make the adjustments to ensure that we're not touching any of the existing weights, and we'll accommodate these two new weights accordingly.
Yeah, Joanna, I see your question in the chat. If you can just share that with President Camille Casaretti, who will then share and get a response to you. That's a more accurate response. We want to make sure that we're giving you accuracy and transparency as opposed to an answer off the top of the head.
All right, and so if there are no more comments or questions from the public, we'll move to CEC members. We will each have 2 minutes, starting with President Camille Casaretti.
Thank you so much. So Superintendent Alvarez, I have a question because last year we saw that schools, our district 15 schools required more than $50 million above and beyond what the DOE allotted in the late spring for budgets. So what is the district going to do to provide the DOE with a needs assessment prior to the budget coming out so that we can advocate for the actual dollars that our schools require rather than just accepting what the DOE thinks we need?
Yeah, here, Camille. So just to start off with this question, I need to be clear that these are the fair student funding allocations that we've been talking about, not necessarily how all of the budget goes to a particular school. But one thing that was not mentioned, and I want to be clear on mentioning, is that this is also per student capita. And so in some places across our district, for example, we had loss of enrollment, and a loss of enrollment impacts a school's ability to actually have the dollars that they would have had in a previous year, right? And so that's one impact of this. The other impact of this has been a result of what the register projections are. School leaders, for example, at this point have had the opportunity to see what they're projected to be registered for next school year. And then if they don't agree with it, are allowed to put in what's called a budget appeal. Many of them have already done that process and have already gotten responses as to what they're expected to be allocated for the next school year. But that's like a moving target, right? And so you might think that, for example, I'm going to use easy numbers, that you're going to have 100 students. And then so the DOE will budget you for 100 students. And then come October 31st, you have 85. So now that's a school that's in a deficit because we've given you funding for about 100 students. Vice versa, you might have students that are above that 100 students and you end up having 115 students. Now you have additional funding that's supposed to come to you at a later time. Some of the funding that has been an issue across our district, and I am fully aware of this, is para-reconciliation. And that's funding that has been knocked off of schools' budgets that they've had to use other funding to be able to address. We have been working with the budget office, particularly Larita Moy, as well as Adrian Duggins, who I believe is here as well, in making sure that we kind of rectify that situation prior to us getting to July 1st, so that schools are more accurately funded prior to the onset of September coming. But that's also a hit or miss, because between July 1st and September 1st, students transfer from schools, and so their weighted funding, even though they may have gone to one school, may end up being allocated another school. So I can't promise that I can address where that gap is going to happen, but what I can promise is that as we're starting to see those gaps happening early on, we're here to try to address them before we even get to the month of September when school starts, to ensure that schools are allocated as best as possible for the beginning of the school year as we start.
Okay, thank you.
Antonia, do you have a question or a comment?
I'll pass.
Okay, Nana, do you have a question or a comment?
No, I'll pass. Thank you.
Okay. Alfred, do you have a question or comment?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. I'm next. Okay, so thank you so much, Superintendent Alvarez, for the presentation tonight. And I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
Sure.
And it's kind of like a general comment, giving everybody some information and background. Last year, as many of you know, there was extensive parent voices who showed up at PEP meetings to say how the budget cuts were completely unacceptable. And from those parent voices, the PEP, which is mostly appointed by the mayor, the majority of its members are appointed by the mayor, the PEP voted in support of the Fair Student Funding formula that had been presented. And so it's wonderful that the push of parents did lead to a working group being put together, which was actually a working group that had already happened previously and was kind of put back together. It's wonderful that it was put back together, but watching the presentation, it does leave me just overall very sad at the fact that, as our superintendent mentioned, 20 schools that have majority poverty students receive 26% more funding than schools that do not have majority students in poverty. And what I'm saying by that is 26% is nothing when you've got schools that do not have students in poverty with $500,000 PTA budgets or even $1 million PTA budgets. So the disparity between the schools where the majority of the students are in poverty and the schools that do not have students in poverty is not 26%. It's like 300%, right? So this funding formula does not fully address the needs of our students that are in temporary housing, that are living in poverty, it doesn't address our students' needs, and it does not rectify the issues of equity that we have in this city. And so I wanted to point that out and bring up yet again that potentially this is one more reason to end mayoral control, because clearly if we parents are able to have more decision-making power, we're going to want to make sure that there's more money going to our schools and to the schools, especially that have the most students in need. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. And I'll pass it on to Vanessa.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you for that very thoughtful, well put together comment. And thank you, Rafael, for that very detailed presentation. I think a lot of us needed that. But where I want to reconcile some information is, as far as I understand it, so for this year and next year, there is no raising of the base foundation on the funding for operational expenses. So the $2,025 that is given to every school remains the same, yet we are asking schools to reduce the number of students, therefore based on the class size matter bill, and therefore also reducing the funding per student formula that they will be receiving, yet the operational expenses will remain the same, the teacher salaries would remain the same or increase, etc. Social workers or all the additional needs. So how do we reconcile the support that we need to give to school for operational expenses with the amount that the schools are getting for smaller class sizes, or hopefully going to get because of the reduction of class sizes, which I think is a phenomenal idea. But then again, how do we reconcile these two concepts?
Vanessa, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're asking is, how are we going to continue to use this funding formula for fiscal year 23-24 if we have the Class Size Reduction Act that school districts have to reduce class size? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
So,
especially if we're not raising the foundation funding that we have.
Yeah.
We're only raising certain categories.
Got you. I got you. Rana, you can jump in. I was going to say something, but you can go ahead and jump in, certainly.
Sure. So we are creating a working group on the class size bill that's been that's coming our way. And I think what Rafael was mentioning in the presentation also is that we know that we have lost enrollment across the city, to be completely transparent, right? And so that appeals process that he spoke about, in addition to the weights that are being proposed, is meant to address our smaller schools, especially those that serve students with disabilities, because we know there are breakage issues across some of the schools that principals and teachers have. They have a tough time covering when the schools are really small. I think because of the current enrollment across the city, our schools have grown smaller, generally speaking, so our class sizes are already smaller, and I think that's why some of the smaller schools are facing some of the breakage issues that I just talked about. But there is a working group that is coming together to address all of what you just expressed. And yes, the foundation aid right now is remaining at $225. This was something that the working group itself considered raising. If you go to the Fair Student or the working group website, you can see the proposal that they recommended. There was a small increase to the foundation weight, and there was a larger increase to the foundation weight. I've been to a few of these CEC meetings, and a lot of the CEC members have actually expressed interest in continuing the work of the Fair Student Funding Group. Personally, I hope that continues because I think it's worthwhile. And I think as our communities are changing, right, I think it's really important to keep this conversation alive. So I think there's more to come on the class size, and we're starting to have those discussions now. And there is a group internally that's working on that, but we know that we have to have community feedback and engagement on that process, and we can't do that unilaterally without the feedback of our community. So all of that will be addressed by the class size working group that's being formed right now by the chancellor.
Thank you, Rana.
Absolutely.
And Nakia, do you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Superintendent Alvarez. That was a great presentation. Very helpful, but also very, layman's terms. It was easy to understand. However, there are so many levels to it, I think, that are very difficult to understand, right? Because we're looking at numbers, and then we want to do the calculations, right? So we're looking at one child that, what the numbers or what the funding is for that one child, depending on the school. And I think, speaking to what Nancy shared, it's difficult to truly see the impact of that, for instance, 26%. In some cases, it may look like it's actually doing well, for some schools. And when you consider, for instance, the schools that have low poverty, and they have, programs, for, I guess, gifted and talented, right? So they're going to have more money. And so it's like, how can you really determine what the trends are and what's successful, what's progressive, what's a regression, right? So thinking about equity trends versus with respect to student poverty, I wondered, when examining the equity and fair student funding, it seems to create a challenge because you can't really, I think, determine, pardon me, like the school level expenditure data, right, before or after. So it's how can you take those numbers? How can you take the schools that have high poverty, low poverty, super high budgets, for PTA, very low budgets for PTA, or PTA even exists? How can you, provide accurate expenditure data that really speaks to the need for each school when you consider, equity trends for students in poverty?
I mean, I don't have a direct answer for that question, because that, as you said, is more complicated than just one particular response answer, because there could be 4 different answers that connect to the same question that you pretty much asked, depending on what angle you're actually looking at. But Rana, I do know that the working group did work with national finances and so on and so forth that looked at some research. I didn't directly see all of the research yet, but what I would suggest, Nakia, is to really look at what the presentations were and what the outcomes were from the national perspective, because that helps. We're a microcosm of an entire country. And so while we are very diverse, there are other aspects of the country that might give us some insight on some of the information as to how some of this was decided. I think that's a first starting point for us to actually look at, to really come up with a more, I wouldn't say a definitive conclusion, right? But I would say a more convincing conclusion, so to speak, right? Something that is more outweighs the benefit, right? When you're thinking about benefits to cost, it's more cost effective to do this than it is to do this, in a sense, right? And so thinking about looking at it from that perspective, but I think you're right. You can't just say that it's 100% that this is what it is, but can something have leaned more one way as a result of being able to provide the additional funding? I can tell you firsthand as a superintendent, when I actually go into schools, that this does make an impact. For example, I was with the principal, Julie Kavanaugh from PS15 today, and we were having our data chat. And one of the things was she could use additional funding to have this, because when we're looking at her data, we recognize that there is a greater need, and sometimes it's not just academic. It's other things that are needed in order to support the academic, because without those other things, the academic's never going to happen. And so, yes, I firmly believe that more dollars to students, for example, in temporary housing, more dollars to students who are in poverty, more dollars to students, because the more dollars equates to additional resources. The key to this is how the schools are utilizing these resources to support their schools, which is why you see some schools more successful than others. I just happen to have an amazing principal at PS15 that's been doing amazing things with that school in Red Hook and has been moving the needle. But it's because we're advocates for the resources there as well, right? And so she happens to have more students with special needs and so on and so forth, because families are now flocking to her school because they know that there's a support system there that's going to help support the student, right? And so as she continues to get more dollars and more support, she's able to provide more resources that many of those families particularly need. So that's how I look at this in terms of when we talk about weighted dollars and what impact weighted dollars are. I want to be clear that weighted dollars doesn't always necessarily equate to proficiency, right? But weighted dollars can equate to supporting a student's needs beyond just the academic. There's also the social emotional aspect that many kids need in order to be successful. And oftentimes in communities that we're talking about that are more impoverished, there is a greater need for that social emotional aspect that helps a student become successful. I mean, I'm a product of East New York, Brooklyn, and that's where I grew up. And I needed that social emotional aspect, and that's helped me become a more scholarly person and an adult as I am now. And I recognize the importance of not just the academics, but also the social emotional need that's necessary to help move a kid. And if I didn't have that in my school because there was a huge push on those types of things, I don't know where I would be today, to be honest with you. And so I think, Nakia, that's I think it's a experience perspective, but also when you think about nationally what kids need, it's not just academic. You have to be able to do the academic, but you need that social and emotional aspect first. I don't care how great the teacher is. I don't care how great the instruction is. If that kid cannot be in that room mentally at that moment, then it's not going to matter. And so having the guidance counselors, the social workers, the additional resources, smaller class settings as another example, having the arts and other avenues for students to experience helps develop the whole child and not just part of the child, right? Which is connected to that test score. Yeah. So, but thank you for that. That made me think a little bit more even about this process as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Rana, if you could just answer one thing. Camille had asked, can you define breakage?
Sure. So when we look to fund schools, we ensure that each teacher is effectively provided 1 point, the weight of like the ratio that we were talking about, like in elementary school, I think it's 22 or 25 kids for one teacher, makes like the whole teacher. We are counting for the 0.2 where the teacher gets a prep, right? Like the teacher is entitled to a prep as well as a lunch period. And so what tends to happen is when our schools are smaller, we don't have sufficient kids in our buildings to equate to that 1.2 level. And when you have like 10 kids on a grade, that's very few kids. And so what that does is based on a weighted student funding formula, we then have to look at how that teacher would get the prep period so that we had another teacher to cover while that teacher was taking her prep or eating her lunch. And so when you have like 10 kids, it generates so many dollars. And so we call that breakage. Like the principals then have to take a look at how many more kids, or who could cover the class while the teacher is how the teacher is going to be able to take her prep. And so in creative scenarios, in some instances where it's feasible, this doesn't happen, I don't think, in a lot of our D1 through 32 schools, but sometimes principals bridge classes. I think this happens more in our District 75 programs. But I think we have to, this is where that, again, appeal process comes into play, where we have to consider how we are going to make the school whole and be able to provide the teacher her prep coverage as well as a lunch period, and that we're not out of compliance there. So the breakage happens when we do have not so even numbers and very small schools. But again, that can happen even if you have a school of 500 kids, but have a very small fifth grade band, and just have like maybe 20 or like 18 kids in that class. It does pose a little bit of a problem. If that happens on a grade level in a larger school, it's easier to cover. When our schools get really small, it's more difficult for us to think about how we are going to work with the principal and her staff to figure that out. But again, that appeal process exists for things like this. And again, we're trying to enhance that moving forward for our smaller schools, especially those serving our students with disabilities.
President Casaretti, this is your forum, so you're welcome to ask as many questions as you'd like. You have one, and I think Nancy also has one.
And I want to let Nancy continue asking everybody to make sure that everyone gets a chance, but I can come back to it. Thank you.
We've gone through all the CEC members, Camille, and according to our bylaws, since people ceded their time, they have ceded it to you. So you can ask the questions for about 5 members who ceded their time.
Thanks. Rana, just to continue on with what you were saying, I remember not too long ago, PS 32 was given to G&T classes by the DOE, but they ended up with something like only 13 children in one class, and and the other class also was very, very small. And so what would a principal do in that scenario? because theoretically that class should have been combined, but because the DOE mandated that they have 2 sections on that grade, the school was basically left to pay for 2 teachers and had a lot of problems because of that. So I heard what you were saying, that the principal would then ask for an appeal. But this feels like it's a little bit different because the DOE is saying you must do this, and then they don't send students to fill the class. So I'm just wondering what happens in that scenario.
Our GNT program actually has a very different, they have special funding when we have classes that don't fill. We have a special school allocation memorandum for our GNT programmed classes. And when a class doesn't fill to 18, we actually fill the empty seats. So we make the class whole so that they can continue to operate those classes.
You mean you fill them financially?
Yeah. So we provide.
So basically, like that class at PS 24 that only has 10 kids in it is getting extra money just to keep it alive.
It's the empty, yeah, it's an empty seat funding. It's in the school allocation memorandum. I can drop the link for you in the chat if you want.
And that's only with the GNT, or does that exist in other programs?
I believe that's special to GNT. There may be I think maybe we do it for our ASD programs. There is another program under our special ed umbrella that also has this same funding model.
Right, but unlike the GNT, we know that like ASD programs are full to capacity and we need more of them.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Let me know if I should drop that link for you.
Yes, please. I would appreciate that if you would. I feel another resolution coming.
And Yvonne?
Yes, thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Superintendent Aris, for the presentation. And I know you have been working with this specific group that I'm going to make a comment about the newly arrived refugees that were coming to our district. And I would like to know if there's any special category or impacted the budget for the district, or how it's being treated, those new students that were coming into the city in January, December, and January.
Yeah, so first of all, well received in our district. We welcome all in our district, and we're going to continue to welcome all in our district, and we're going to continue to be supportive of all those that come into our district, irregardless of their status. That's first and foremost. Secondly, many of the schools which I'm aware of that we don't know definitively for sure which one are asylum students and which ones are not, refugee students, which ones are not. What we do know is the number of students that are coming in from our temporary housing and are doubled up in our families. We know that many of them are bilingual. Many of them have been given opportunities because we have the McKinney-Vento Act. So the McKinney-Vento Act allows students to be able to go to the school that's closest to them. The parent has that choice. We've been working with Wayne Harris, who is the director for Brooklyn North, in terms of students in temporary housing. And what we do with those particular cases is that many of those families are Spanish speaking. So what we've tried to do is get into the schools that are closest to them, but then also provide them opportunities for programs that support their native language. So we tried to place them in dual language programs if the parents want. What's happened is many kids have been going together to similar schools. So we have about 7 or 8 schools that many of these families have been going to open arms and well received into their dual language programs, but we've given them access to that. So it's first closest school to them. Second choice is if you want the bilingual program. Now, some that haven't wanted the bilingual program have been placed in other schools, which have decided to take the ENL services, but we are closely monitoring whether that number of students in a particular grade get to the number 15, because once it gets to the number 15, we can then open up a program at that particular school to service that particular need, if that makes sense. When it's below 15, then we have to offer that service to them across the district. But again, it's a little more nuanced and complicated, because when they are in temporary housing to the McKinney-Vento Act, they have the right by law to go to the closest school to them. We've been working with the Office of Temporary Housing in trying to get additional resources. So one of the events we did was the call to action, where we raised resources, not from one school, but every school participated across our district to support those 450 families that receive goods and services. We've been working with other agencies to get additional supports, for example, appointments at NYU Langone and some other clinics to help these families get through the processes of getting their vaccinations and everything that's required to continue to stay in our public schools. And then we've also been working with pantries and other organizations to get supplies for these particular families as well. So this is an academic approach, social emotional approach, and then a resources approach. And I have to thank both elected officials, City Council Member Hanif and City Council Member Aviles, who have been pioneers in our district in supporting this work and supporting us in every way, shape, or form to get these families resources. So those are the things that we've been doing so far. We actually didn't want to throw out the hint now, but we have an article coming out eventually from Politico about the work that we've been doing across our district, because we've been helping to lead the work of supporting these particular members in our community. Thanks for the question, Ivan.
Okay, as we have no more questions from CEC members, I'll pass it to Camille.
Thank you so much, Nancy. So thank you, Superintendent Alvarez and Rana. Thank you for being here. Larita, I saw you there too. I know you're doing a lot behind the scenes, so shout out to you.
Camille, shout out to Adrian as well. Adrian Duggins is the Brooklyn North director overall. So she's also here. So I just wanted to shout her out to her.
Hi, Adrian. Thank you for all of your work. Okay, everyone. So thank you again for joining us this evening for our February 2022 calendar meeting. Today was the first real snow of the season that we've seen. I'm sure the children were very happy walking to school in the snow, and with any luck, we'll be able to see more snowy days. I want to give a shout out to Selena Atterbury, who is hosting a Black History and Women's History celebration as we speak. Selena, we are with you in spirit tonight. I'm sure that this is a absolutely wonderful event and very sad to be missing it. This event was an opportunity to reflect and share what Black history means to all of us as a whole, and to remember and uplift women who have had a great impact and influence on our lives. So very glad that Selena was able to put that together, and maybe we'll get some feedback on how the event went. And other exciting news about the CEC elections, the application period has now closed and candidate statements are posted on the DOE website. The D15 President's Council is going to be leading the candidate forum for District 15 on Monday, March 27th, but starting at 6 p.m. So please save the date and you'll be able to meet people who are running to be a CEC 15 member. As I said, the candidate statements are online, so you can start learning more about candidates right now. Voting will take place after all of the candidate forums have been completed citywide. And so the voting will be sometime between April and May. You must have a NICSA account to vote. So please reach out to your parent coordinator ASAP if you don't have one. I just asked somebody to drop those 3 links in the chat for the election information. I want to give a quick update on the Citywide Wellness Advisory Council. So every 3 years, the Department of Education is mandated to review its school wellness policy, where a review committee is formed, and that includes members of CEC, the Chancellor's Parent Advisory Committee members, and other parent leaders. So I volunteered and I'm sitting on that council. The meetings are scheduled once a month until June, when the committee will provide a set of recommendations that will be shared with DOE leadership to offer insight on parent and caregiver expectations for wellness-related instruction and programs as they relate to the DOE policy. In the last meeting, we discussed what makes a school physically active. And in the next meeting, we're going to be discussing physical education and preparing physically literate students. If you'd like to submit feedback on the current DOE wellness policy, please write to me at CamilleCEC15@gmail.com. The wellness policy can be found on the DOE Info Hub website, and I would ask if somebody could please drop that in the chat, the link to the wellness policy, and my email, please, for feedback. Just another couple of things. On Thursday night this week, we're going to be meeting with the School Construction Authority to discuss the 5-year capital plan and learn about renovations or additions that are being made in our District 15 school buildings. We are also going to hear about updates on new schools coming to D15, some opening in the fall and others in future years. There will be an opportunity for public comment, so please come with your questions. As you know, CEC 15 submitted a very long list of capital plan requests recently. We should be hearing back about those requests in a couple of months. If you have any new issues or new building requests, you could suggest those during this Thursday's meeting, or feel free to write to us. Please note that our elected officials, including City Council, the Borough President, and Senate, all have access to capital funding dollars. So if SCA is not funding your ask, you could also go to the elected officials to ask for those capital dollars. On March 14th, we're going to be holding a business meeting and a combined special session. We'll be taking public comments between now and then on a couple of resolutions that will be up for a vote, and we will then vote during the special session. So the resolutions will be shared via email. If you're not already on our email list, please ask to be added by writing cec15@schools.nyc.gov. Somebody drop the email information in the chat, please. And then just a last bit of news. Right before this meeting, I found out that Brooklyn Prospect Charter School has filed for an expansion of their kindergarten and 5th grade in their Sunset Park site. They are asking to add 55 kindergarten students and 25 5th grade students for the 2023-24 school year. So that would be starting in September. There's going to be a public hearing on this proposed expansion on Monday, March 20th at 5:30 p.m. via Zoom. Speakers must sign up by 12 p.m. the same day, which is a total outrage, and I'm planning to complain about that. You may also contact the SUNY Charter Institute. Our phone number is 518-445-4269. or write to them at charters@suny.edu. And if somebody could please drop all of that information in the chat, I would really appreciate it. And I hope members of our public will call about this idea of a charter school expanding in Sunset Park. We have a special guest with us here on the call, Emmett Sklar from the Public Advocate's Office. I'd just like to ask for Emmett to please unmute to introduce yourself and say hello and welcome.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. Sorry about the noise in the background. Hope you all are doing well and staying warm. I am the Brooklyn Borough Advocate for our New York City Public Advocate, Jamani Williams, which means I have the privilege of going to a lot of these. However, this is the only one that I actually grew up in, and I actually see a former teacher of mine on the call. So it's great to be home in a respect. The Public Advocate recently rallied against raising the charter cap at the state level. We also recently joined fellow advocates to push for enhanced funding and resources for students in foster care. So we are well aware of some of the major issues facing schools around the city, but also in CEC 15. But I'm really here today just to say that our office and I'm a resource for you for whatever you need. So feel free to bring any issues that you have going on at your school. To our office, we have some education experts on staff, both on the constituent service side and on the organizing side. A lot of folks don't know that, like a council member, we have a constituent service team that is prepared and ready to work with you and have helped a lot of parents navigate the public school system as well. So I'll be on the rest of this call, and I'll try and make as many of the CEC meetings as I can, but I'll put my info in the chat, and please feel free to reach out. Thanks so much.
Emmett, I thank you so much, and so nice to meet you. We've had an incredible relationship with Jumani Williams' office and his team, and so it's great to know that you're here, and we will definitely be reaching out to you. Thank you so much. So that's the end of my president's report. I wanted to hand the floor over to Nancy. I think that she's going to give a little bit of feedback on some of the meetings that she's been attending.
Sure. Thank you, Camille. As most of you know, the superintendent and deputy superintendent contracted WXY to do an evaluation of the diversity plan. And they kindly invited Camille and I to be a part of the planning team. And so WXY has been doing a lot of work speaking with many different community members, stakeholders in and around the district. So just to give a couple of, from the parent related side, a couple of highlights. They, a few months ago, spoke with the President's Council, and now they're reaching out to schools in order to be able to speak to some parents at schools to understand what the last 5 years, essentially, of the diversity plan have brought for families in our district and how it has affected families and basically where we are today. This week I attended the district leadership team meeting, and Superintendent Alvarez gave a great presentation on everything basically that's going on in our district. The high school superintendent's office also gave a presentation, and ultimately it's very exciting to be in a district that has so much that's going on, and I think just being really appreciative of the energy that's happening right now. And I'll pass it back to Camille.
Thank you so much. Anton, here on the call?
Yes.
Just wanted to ask, do you want to give any update, charter update or anything like that?
No.
In that case, I will hand the floor over to Superintendent Alvarez for the District 15 report.
Thanks, Camille. It'll be short today, I promise. Shanice, do you have the PowerPoint? Or do you need me to share?
Yes, I have it.
Okay, cool. Today's mainly going to be a little bit about celebrations because we've been doing a lot of little things, but a lot of little things equate to a lot of great things. So we can go to the next slide. It's just the agenda. I want to celebrate, back one more. I want to celebrate Cynthia Lascano from our Little Pre-K Center, who excelled in all areas of her state visit for our Pre-K for All program in our district. But also want to shout out middle school 839 and 146, which we all know as BNS. They have been accepted into the 2022-23 school year's Lighthouse Collaborative Program. For those of you who don't know, this program opens the doors citywide for people from across the city to see amazingly great, awesome practices from two expert leaders. One is elementary, which is Principal Castellucci, as well as Principal Perberg, who's our middle school. So I just want to shout them out for the great work that they're doing. They've been getting tons of visitors, and people I know from across the city have been reaching out, asking, what else is there? I'm like, there's a lot more schools. There's just only two there, but there's a lot more if you want to come. So we're excited about that. Next slide. I do want to, as we're going into March, Women's History, this is a month that's important to me. For those of you who know, I lost my mom and my grandma they were amazing women, and I'm where I am today because of the strong women. And so I think behind every adult is a strong woman that gets us to where we have to be. And so I want to pay homage to celebrating women who tell our stories. And then, celebrate a little bit of those who celebrate our St. Patrick's Day. It's another holiday that's very important to our counterparts. And so I want to make sure that we pay homage to that. And as we leave Black History Month, I want to make sure that we ensure that Women's History is every month. Black History is every month. We just spend a few moments to go a little deeper so that we have a complete better understanding of who these people are in our society that have contributed to what we call American history. So want to pay homage to that. Next slide. And some more stuff. So Respect for All, PS 896 participated in what they call a circle of security, where kids were looking at understanding personal space and making sure they're secure within their personal space, but also understanding and learning how to respect other people's personal space. And I think this is as simple as this sounds, it's really important, especially in today's society, where unfortunately a lot of people would like to be in people's personal space. So teaching children at a young age what that means and what that looks like and how to utilize it is just an amazing experience. And principals shared this information. Ruth shared this from Sunset Park section, so it was great. Next slide. And our little ones, our 3K pre-K, and they currently have kindergarten, our inclusive school, PS 958, had a friendship dance. Amazing sensory tables and touching tables, and the kids were just awesome, learning how to share friendship and be a part of friendship across their school. So they're building that from early on, and that's part of their vision and mission. So we love this inclusive environment. As you all know, this school has several different programs that are to support inclusive schools. And this is a model that we want to keep going towards across our district. And so we're excited about that. Next slide. District 15's new middle school. So the PEP approved our middle school that's going to be opening at the Fort Hamilton Parkway site that's expected to open in 2026. What's going to happen is that PS 516 is at 422 4th Avenue. They will start off with 6th grade in the 2025 school year. The 2024 school year, we will have the 6th grade there. The 25 school year will have the 7th grade, and the school building in 2026 will be ready for the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders to move to their site. They're going to co-locate this beginning middle school is going to co-locate with PS 516 in their 4th and 5th grade in the old building. But some great news, 516 is getting a brand new building, which is going to be literally across the street, which is going to house their pre-K all the way up to 3rd grade. And they have an outdoor space, which we're excited about because their current site doesn't have an outdoor space for them. And this is a not a rooftop space, but a 3rd floor space, because the building is the 4th floor, I think up to the 5th floor, but it also has a 3rd floor space. It's going to be an amazing space. We invite you to use this site as a CEC meeting so we can tour that building once it's actually completed for September. So we're excited about that. Next slide. This is a big thing. So I coordinated with the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Liberty to not just offer District 15 Brooklyn basketball clinics, but I got them to offer the entire borough Brooklyn basketball clinics. So between this year and next year, every single elementary and middle school will participate in 4 clinics that will happen at every school building. 45-minute clinics where kids will get shirts, but they will also get basketballs for their school. And then there's going to be tickets that will be given to the principals to utilize with specific criteria for students to be able to go to Brooklyn Nets games for free. And Liberty games, I should say, both, because it's a both partnership. In addition to this partnership, I've also secured $150,000 from the Brooklyn Nets and New York Liberty to provide for after-school program, as I promised. However, I'm going to be equitable because across our borough, there's a need. So District 13, because that's where they reside, right, is going to get $50,000. District 15 will get $50,000, and we're going to donate $50,000 to the other side to my people in Brooklyn South in Canarsie, District 18. and those are strategically done. And so we're looking forward to those partnerships. Look out for it. CEC members, I will be reaching out to you as soon as I have a date where this press release will happen, because we would love for you to join us in that press release. So we're excited about that partnership. Next slide. Our diversity plan, as Nancy shared with you earlier, our equity lens is to remove barriers of access, create middle school that are more representative of the district, and ensure that the challenge of integration did not disproportionately fall on families of color. And as of right now, our progress update and evaluation objectives, we're going to be looking at providing a progress update of each of the recommendations in the original plan, identify potential areas of improvement, understand resource disparities across middle schools, highlight celebrated practices within school communities that exist, summarize communities' response, feedback, and concerns, and analyze District 15 student academic progress in comparison to New York City overall and comparable districts. We're well underway. Nancy and Camille graciously meet with us I believe it's every other week that we meet on Friday to go over some questions, thoughts. And so it's a collaborative effort in ensuring that we're all our voices are heard and different perspectives as we look to analyze how this work is going. Nicole or Deirdre, if you could just throw in the chat the link to the D15 document that was created, a one-pager that's front and back, that kind of summarizes all this information so that if you didn't know, this is what WXY is doing. I only bring that up because I know CEC Council Member Vincent Liu and some other parents were concerned and wanted to know what the objectives were. So we're being transparent and giving you what those objectives are on a 2-page document so that you could see for yourself what it is that we're evaluating and looking at. Next slide. Upcoming events and deadlines, next slide. These are pretty much, before anything, project-based learning exhibition. We are well under our way planning our district-wide PBL exhibition on May 25th. Right now, it's going to be at Industry City. We're looking at possibly doing an outdoor with the tents, but if it rains, having a contingency plan at the same location. They're working with us to do this. It's going to be 5 to 7 p.m. It's a committee of district representatives, administrators, teachers, and other planning supports for this. All schools will be participating. And just to give you a little sneak peek, this is our Brooklyn Middle School, PS 146, who had kind of a mini PBL celebration where one of our staff members went and was able to take pictures of our kids already presenting their work at their school. We're really, really, really excited about this share fair. And I want to thank CEC for bringing this to my attention, the school-wide enrichment model and PBL work, which we're doing district-wide. And we're, I think, the only district doing district-wide right now. And they're utilizing what we're doing with our district and trying to share it to other districts. So again, District 15 leading the way, but just don't tell the other districts because they get upset. Next slide. Deadlines, pre-K application is open until March 10th. Your 3K applications as well. Summer Youth Employment Program applications, they are due by March 31st, ages 14 to 24. Apply, apply, apply. There are, the mayor is putting tons of money into this. So apply, apply, apply. Let's have our kids working in our schools and supporting our communities. And above all, making some money to do it so they can get their sneakers and all the other things that they love as they go to school. And then the New York City School Survey is open until March 31st. So please, if you haven't done it, please do it. It's in multiple languages. It's online and it's a paper copy, whichever one you want. Next slide. Next town hall, March 15th. Next year, we will be doing 4 town halls quarterly. But our next one for this school year is March 15th. For those of you who want to have conversations with me, let's talk. And next slide. Q&A. Anything for me?
Thank you so much, Superintendent Alvarez. We are first going to have a public comment period. If there's anyone from the public who would like to ask a question, make a comment, please raise your hand. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Johanna did ask in the chat Is there a way individuals, not just SLTs or CECs, can provide feedback to the diversity plan?
Yeah, there and WXY is in the works of doing that, where a survey is going to go out for the community to be involved. So it's not just going to be SLTs and CECs. There will be several other members of the community that will have access to a survey that they will be able to do. We're in the process of getting that through to the schools, so that the schools can disseminate that to parents in the community so that we can get all voices. So it's not just going to be SLT and CECs, but we're doing all different levels of leadership within the schools and then within the community itself. So look forward to that. That should be coming in the next month.
Okay, great. And now we'll move to CEC member comments or questions, starting with Camille Casseretti.
I'm gonna take a pass. I said a lot before.
Okay, Antonia.
Yeah, I actually do have some comments. Hi, Superintendent Alvarez. I spent the day at K497 today with Principal Schmoger, and I was wondering about a couple of things that are going on in the school. I was wondering if you had an update on the advocacy for the the schools that have lost Title I funding. As you know, the school lost it by just 2%. And I know we were sending somebody from the DOE that was like a liaison with the state. I was wondering if you had any update on that.
I'm looking at it right now. I just have to pull it up. Just give me 1 second.
Or
what I do know is that if a school loses it for whatever reason, they're in what's called a year of what do they call it? Grandfathered in. School gets grandfathered for a year. And then within that year, if they continue to go down that slope, then they don't lose all the funding. And let me be clear on that. There's a difference between SWP, which is school-wide funding for it, versus targeted funding. So they would still presumably get money for the targeted students that are in alignment to that Title I need, because that's what it's designed for. They just wouldn't get it to be able to use as a school-wide thing. Please note that if they are falling under that category, they are 20% of what's considered the wealthiest schools across our city, not just our district, because it's citywide based. When it comes to Borum Hill, yeah, they haven't been, so Borum Hill High School has not had SWP funding well beyond 5 years. Just so that you know, for the past 5 years, they haven't received school-wide Title I funding because they've been under that 60% threshold. Currently, there have been only 2 schools in District 15 that fall under that. Right now, that is 88, which missed it by 0.7, which can be presumably 2 to 3 students. I don't foresee her losing it next school year. This is the first year that it's happening. She's at 59.3. And just so that you know, Brooklyn Collaborative Studies, which has been brought up before, started to lose it. They lost it in 2022. They got grandfathered in for 1 year. In 2023, they continued to lose it because of the percentage that they're at as it relates to fair student funding. But that doesn't mean that they don't receive Title I funding. Let's just be clear on that. They get targeted assistance versus school-wide program.
But there's no update on that. The DOE liaison with the state who is advocating to
Sharon Rencher,
change
yeah,
the percentage.
So Sharon Rencher has been looking at this data to determine if there is in fact anything that can be done. She's still in the process of analyzing where this is coming from and how and what impact it's specifically having on individual schools. To be determined. That still hasn't been finalized yet.
Oh, okay. And the other thing that I observed was that BHS is really using every little bit of space that it has. They have children doing their mandatory PE in the hallway next to the gym. They have kids taking their OT in basically closet spaces and in the library, while ESL students are also having their services. She's really using every little bit of space. And there are unused spaces in the co-located charter, and literally no students in the space. And there doesn't seem to be a clear way for charters to return space back to the DOE school. There's a clear way for DOE schools in co-located buildings to exchange that space when it's needed. But
that's going to be an easy answer for you, Antonia. I'm going to look into the school utilization plan and speak with the Office of District Planning to identify if there are ways to actually be able to get space back. There actually are ways. I don't know if many of you are aware of PS9 in District 13, who had a charter in their school and eventually were able to win all their space back because they had more students wanting to go to their school. So there is a possibility. Let me look into that tomorrow. It's going to take me a few days because they're going to have to do their homework in terms of utilization by school within the space of a building, which is a whole different process, to see if the spaces aren't being utilized by particularly students, but another school site might need it, if those spaces are provided back to that particular site for not having students use the space. Because the whole idea of shared space is to actually use the space and not to leave the space available. So I'll look into that tomorrow for BHS.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Nana.
No, I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alfred?
None for me, Nancy. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yvonne?
Oh, I pass this time. Thank you.
Okay. I'm next, but I was formulating my question, thinking someone else was going to go while I could finish formulating it. But I guess the conversation about Title I funding made me remember that and I think Antonio, you were a little bit mentioning or alluding to this, made me remember the different percentages by borough, which are totally not fair. So could you just remind us what those percentages are?
Yeah, Rana, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe for all of the boroughs in the city, it's 60%. I think that where the change happens is in Staten Island, which if I'm correct, it's 48%. Is that correct, Rana?
Second, I just want to make sure this is right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, 60%, and Staten Island is actually 54.99%.
54.99%.
Did it used to be different? Did that change recently? I thought there was a greater disparity. Or no, it's been like this for some time.
Let me just take a look at I'm just going to take a look at 2018. Give me 1 second.
And just if you didn't know, while everyone's doing that and Nancy's still revising her question or asking another question, the WXY one pager front and back is actually posted. I believe if she posted it, she posted it in all 3 languages. So we have it in Chinese, English, and Spanish. And those, Camille, can be posted on the CEC website as well.
In fiscal year 2019, which was school year 2018-19, that's about 5 years ago, the Staten Island percent was 52.13. Every other borough was 60%.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, and I'll pass it to Vanessa. Do you have a question or comment?
I do not today.
Okay. And Nakia, do you have a question or comment?
None for me. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll pass it back to you, Camille.
Sorry. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Superintendent Alvarez. We appreciate you.
I'll be here if you need.
Yes, thank you. Next on our agenda is the Brooklyn High School Superintendent's report. Yuet Chu is here with us this evening. Yuet, the floor is all yours. Thank you for being here.
Hi, friends. I think I missed you guys last month. My friend Diana covered for me. So it's great to be in company with you. Thank you, Shanice. You're a rock star as always. So those of you who were at DLT, this will be a little repetitive, but always glad to share.
I don't know what happened. I'm trying to figure this out.
Yeah, I think Zoom and Outlook are not liking each other right now. If you make me co-host, I can share mine. Because this was happening to me earlier.
Okay, I made you a co-host.
Okay.
Let's
see. This updated Zoom is so not fun. Basic, sorry. No, it's not letting me do it. Shanice, can I send you? So you know what? Let me do this. I'm gonna try to put it in the chat.
I'm trying to pull it back up as well.
See, this is what happens when you trust technology.
Okay.
So maybe don't present and you can just scroll through because that looks like it's working. Yeah, so Brooklyn North High Schools. I was at enjoying a snowy day today. We took our principals out to SUNY Old Westbury. Each month we've been trying to take our principals to different colleges and we're trying to cover the 5 boroughs and go beyond. And it was absolutely exquisite. Janice and Rochelle and I have been meeting with each of our principals to reflect on mid-year data. So we talk about district graduation, but with each principal, we're talking about school by school data. You can fast forward, Shanice, probably to slide 5. I believe Diana shared our draft DCEP goals with you guys last month, and based on some feedback that we got from different constituencies and also from the Division of School Leadership, we've updated our SMART goals, really just to make them more rigorous. Those of you who hang out with the Chancellor have heard him use the term moonshot, that just setting steady goals is not enough for students. We have to think boldly and for us, that's raising, originally our DCEB goal for the regions was to match whatever the city average is going to be. And we have elevated those goals to reach for what's considered the college and career proficiency rates, which currently is defined as a 80%, a score of 80 on the ELA and Algebra 1. So today we talked to principals about doing mock regions, about really understanding whether a student, what students need to achieve a college and career ready. And we believe in project-based learning and we believe in authentic experiences in school, but as Janice, those of you who have heard her, as she likes to say, you know, if a 65 on the ELA regions is not good enough for my kid on Long Island, it should not be good enough for our kids in Brooklyn North. Similarly, for attendance, we we increased our goal to the 90% city average, but we also increased our aspirations for reducing chronic absenteeism by a 10% incremental to keep our district at 28% chronically absent, which would be 10% above last year and slightly reaching beyond the chancellor's charge of 30% for the city. My favorite goal when I talk to CECs and parents is based on the school survey. Last year, 63% of our families indicated they were involved in school activities. We have set a goal of 83% for this year, and specifically targeting our multilingual learners, just like Raphael shared. In Brooklyn North, we have opened our arms to migrant families, students in temporary housing, students coming to the city for what the city is great for. And we've done well. Last year, 77% of our multilingual learner families indicated that they were participating in school events. So we want to close that gap. Like there was something our schools were doing around multilingual families that were getting more families to be in touch with schools. And we're looking at that and expanding that so that we can raise all of our families engaging with our schools. Next slide, please, Shanice. And then this is, as those of you who have been reading CEPs know the CEPs are like 42 pages, which we did not want to share with you guys. This is just a snapshot of all of the strategies that we are investing in this year in support of our goals. So tier 1 is everyone. Tier 1 is like your whole class. So that's our core instruction work, ongoing 530-10 instructional models, ongoing district-wide professional learning. We're meeting with parent coordinators, school counselors, programmers. Every month we offer office hours every week, just making the district open and inclusive. We are planning some spring parent engagement events based on Janice's listening tour from August. We're offering an evening with the Options Institute to support parents with engaging with their child or children in conversations about college. It's actually parallel to a training that we're doing with the school counselors and the parent coordinators, so everyone can be on the same page and using the same language. We're also going to offer math and literacy nights so parents can actually themselves experience some slices of the ELA and Algebra 1 regions so that they can, if they wish to, have some authentic ways to think about strategies for the regions with their children. And then tier 2 are select groups of schools, these based on data, based on the principal performance visits that Janice and Rochelle engage in. They completed the first semester ones, took all of that information, and with our team, designed some very targeted professional learning in literacy and math. Thanks to the central team, almost all of our schools are supplementing classroom instruction with online tutoring. Most of our schools are using Khan Academy, and I believe 9 of our schools were selected for a CUNY pilot with college students tutoring our students in school. And then tier 3, those are our intensive care schools, and it's just ongoing Operation Graduation, ongoing in-school support with specific instructional leads in the content areas. Some schools are receiving support in culture and climate because we now have half a year of incident data and suspension data to look at. So Terrence Paulin and our culture and climate team are launching an assessment visit with several of our schools and then working with them to design action plans. Next slide, please, Shanice. This is just an update on our data. Diana shared that last month, the CEC requested 6-year graduation data. So we've added that in the second column. And when you have a chance, you can take a look. Next slide, please. And then all the amazing things that were happening in February. The two that I wanted to highlight was on February 9th, 500 of our students were invited to the HBCU showcase at Barclay Center, where they joined students from across the city, engaged with colleges, set up some college trips. And then right before the break, we had our fantastic Aspen Challenge Brooklyn launch with 20 schools, 160 kids. The keynotes were Janice Ross and Misty Copeland, the prima ballerina of the New York City Ballet. And students heard from some incredible people who set forth 5 challenges for them to work on. One around food deserts in Brooklyn, one around supports for formerly incarcerated young people, one around safe streets in Brooklyn based on some sad and tragic data around traffic accidents, one on identity and spoken word, and then one on the idea of like community organization. So schools now have 8 weeks to work on these challenges. And on April 24th, we'll be coming back together to hear their presentations. And then 3 schools will be selected to travel to Aspen to compete in the national challenge. So we're excited for that, and we'll be sure to invite you all to the April 27th event. Next slide, please, Shanice. I don't know if you guys got these from Senator Persaud, but Janice wanted to share. Senator Persaud is offering some community events throughout the month of March. So there's a day when there are free mammograms. This is particularly for some of our migrant families. NILAG is a phenomenal legal aid group that works specifically with undocumented persons, and they provide one-on-one consultation. And I think Senator Persaud has them in this like mobile clinic that's going to be traveling throughout Brooklyn. And then an Easter egg hunt. So those are for you if you don't have them already to share as you see fit. Next slide, please. And then as usual, our website is updated with current events. Our parent coordinators have put together the monthly district digest, which is linked here for you and also on our website. And then as always, Diana's phenomenal work on Instagram and Twitter for us. And I think that's all I got. I think the last slide is just the fun map of our schools that when you get a chance, you can click and play and learn more about Brooklyn North High Schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions or comments from the public? Okay, then we'll do a CEC member roll call. Camille?
Hi, I just want to uplift what Rayhan was writing in the chat about the Regents exams and flag that Chancellor Banks and Mayor Adams seem to be going in a backwards pathway when New York State is talking about removing Regents exams. Now, the Chancellor and the Mayor just want to double down on all of this testing. We know that children are not in the headspace or mind frame to be drilled and tested all day long. We need to elevate social emotional learning and project-based learning. But to that end, I want to thank you, Yuette, for always being here and sharing this information. Something that's really been on my mind lately, I'm seeing it in my children's high schools. I don't know if any of you know, but like now both of my kids are in high school, so I'm kind of like in a new world here. There is just this extraordinary amount of drugs, and like I knew this was going to be part of the high school experience, but I'm just totally blown away. Like I'm seeing children that are really addicted, like need to go to rehab. Hearing stories about children in my daughter's school shooting up in the bathroom and doing vodka shots during class, like pretending it's water. So like, I'm just wondering, what kind of supports are we going to be giving to students that have addiction problems? New York City, New York State does not have recovery high schools. Like these are available across the nation. And why we do not have that model is a big mystery to me. Like this is a model that really is geared towards helping students, children, or babies to come out of their alcohol or drug addiction, like continue their studies in a safe, nurturing space, and get the support, the years of support that they actually need around this problem. And I'm wondering if, like, could Brooklyn North be a leader in this work? Because we really need to have a school like this in every borough.
So I'm going to put on my previous life hat as the executive director of District 79. And I would invite, and I'm happy to make the connection for you. District 79 runs something called the Restart Academy, which has various New York City public schools programs, some in treatment centers, some in hospitals, some, and Joan Indart, who's the principal of Restart, is a phenomenal leader and human being. So I would invite you, and I'm happy to connect you, Camille, with Joan or with the superintendent of D79, because they actually do have a lot of super specialized programs, and all with the aspiration to kind of wrap the system's arm around the most fragile, the most high-risk students. So I can make that connection for you offline, and maybe you can invite them to come to a future CEC meeting.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Thank you so much.
And then also just in terms of our high schools, most of our high schools have access to either a full-time SAPIS counselor, and SAPIS stands for Substance Abuse Prevention and Intervention Specialists, I think. These are Raphael's nodding, thank you, Raphael. These are highly trained individuals that are supported centrally, that are assigned to high schools, and each high school, if they don't have access to a full-time SAPIS, they share one with another school. And we have been thinking a lot, not just in terms of just kind of substance abuse in general, and with the legalization of this and the legalization of that, and shops opening up right down the streets from our schools, that we need to be proactive about this. One other thing that's happening in March for Brooklyn North, I forgot to mention, I think it's in our March presentation, is in December, Janice hosted a student town hall with DA Gonzalez, where the students shared with interested adults what their perceptions of issues are in Brooklyn. We're bringing them back together in March, again with the DA, with folks from the mayor's office, and to dig deeper into these topics. And there will be a couple of groups of students who will be hosting a conversation around this issue. So I will be sure to invite you to that as well. And we hope that, out of that continued conversation, there can be some real solutions that adults are helping our students implement.
Sounds good, thank you.
And Camille, if I may add, perhaps we can have a conversation at a later time with CEC about spaces, because there might be a possible space that we can probably request this to be in our district, so that we're supporting kids within our district. I'll talk to you about that later, about a space that we could probably use as early as next year.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Antonia, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback actually what Camille was saying, I mean, Camille and I have had a lot of conversations about this, and I've relayed them to Superintendent Alvarez and Nicole Lancelotti. I think we need to have a conversation about this before it gets to recovery. And what does the health curriculum look like now in light of all of this legalization and increased access to substances that we're finding out more and more about every day, that they're stronger than they used to be, have more addictive qualities, that they can bring on mental illness and chronic vomiting. I mean, what we're learning about is not what we thought of as we approached legalization. And so how is the health correct? Because that's where it lives, correct? Substance abuse lives in the health curriculum. And I just think we need to rethink it, put a little more emphasis, rewrite it to update it. And so I'm wondering if those conversations are happening in Brooklyn North.
So not specifically about the curriculum, but that's a great idea, Antonia, and Raphael and I will bring that to the central team. But what we do, we're working with our school counselors to equip them, in addition to the supports from SAPIS, even like, I hate to use the words, but they're like fundamental skills of noticing signs, right? And in Brooklyn North, we talk a lot about the pedagogy of critical love and what it means to see, hear, and affirm kids. And this is basic. This is 101. Just notice, having adult connections with kids, so that if UET comes to school a little bit off, someone is going to notice. And it starts there, right? And then we layer in the supports. Is Raphael UET's favorite teacher? Then someone's, I'm gonna notice and I'm gonna say, hey, Raphael, can you check in? That's kind of the super granular stuff. And then between the school counselors, the SAPIS, many of our schools also work with community-based organizations like Good Shepherd, like St. Nick's, that add an additional layer of support. But I don't know, Raphael, I know your calendar's busy, but I'm kind of, just like Camille's feeling resolutions coming up, I'm kind of feeling maybe we do a District 15 community conversation, right?
Why don't we schedule ourselves for Friday and have a discussion a little further on this? I know for myself as a district, and I haven't announced it yet at the CEC, is that I'm trying to bring TCIS training across my district. So my goal is to have people trained at the district level so that we can continue to train everyone at our schools to help with therapeutic crisis intervention services across our schools, because sometimes those are the areas where we start picking up where those things are. And I was just about to type in it, but I'm just going to say it loudly. Rayhan is right. A lot of this is beginning in the middle school environment. This isn't just an issue in the high school. This is an issue in our middle schools. And it's getting to our middle schools more because our high school students are influencing our middle school students before they even get to high school. And this is a huge crisis in middle school. I'm not going to hide it. It's a really big crisis in high school, but it's starting in middle school. They're already going into middle school with this mentality. And so we have to address it. So you reach out to me on my calendar anytime after 10 o'clock on Friday. We'll work and then we can schedule ourselves to figure out how we do something in collaboration.
Thank you. I just really want to reiterate and emphasize that the conversation has to happen before you see Johnny has a problem or Johnny's eyes are a little weird. The conversation needs to be in 6th grade, like,
Agreed.
Like you're saying. Thank you.
Right. Nana, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, So I do have a question this time, right? I think, it is just to echo on what is being said by both Antonia and Camille. Based on the conversation I'm having, is really a crisis at this point. And the crisis has become, in terms of that there's connection between parents and teachers and what is happening to their kids in school, right? Where the only time that a parent probably is going to hear that my kids are doing drugs is when police comes in place and handcuff them, right? So it's a really scary place because I don't know what has escalated that in New York. I don't know whether it's post-pandemic that, parents, all the kids were at home and all of a sudden they go to school and they didn't really learn how to grow into being a high schooler. And they're just there being sheltered for 2 years and all of a sudden everything else is coming up in their face and they don't know how to handle it. Teachers are not really communicating with the parents. The kids have gone to puberty where the parents are trying to scramble and figure out what is going on. And in the last few weeks, there have been instances where innocent kids have held a bag for somebody and the cop showed up and innocently, and the cops came and were handcuffed, right? And so like Antonia said, like, these are all conversations that really needs to, people need to have, we need to start having these conversations in schools, whether on a daily basis as part of the curriculum, to let them understand like what they're really getting into, the side effects, and all these needs to, we need to, if it's not, I think we need to push it quicker than we think it is, because the problem is getting out of hand a little bit. It's just because of the fact that my son is in high school and talking to him and hear some of the comments that he's making about the friends and stuff like that. For me as a parent, I'm telling you, I'm quite naive because I see him such a little boy. I'm like, how do you know all these things, right? So that being said, I really want to be part of that, where I think we need to start having a conversation sooner rather than later, and the conversation should be focused on prevention, right? Education, quicker, rather than conversation if somebody already gets into it, because then they need to leave the high school, go to a different high school, and it becomes a bigger issue, right? So I can't overemphasize the importance of really, really moving this needle quickly, because it's really getting out of hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. Alfred?
I don't have a comment. Thank
Okay.
you, Nancy.
Great. Yvonne?
I'm fine. No comments.
Okay. So I wanted to say a couple of things. One is a quick search shows that only 8 states have high school exit exam requirements. So New York is definitely in the minority. And as there's extensive research that shows that the regions do prevent students from being able to graduate. And so that, of course, is a problem, and they go on to a 5th year. So that, I think, is something that, of course, really needs to be considered. And the advocacy around ending the regions, I think, is one that we really need to move forward with and continue to push forward on. And then the other comment is, I completely agree, Antonia and Nana, with your comments. And one of the things that people keep saying to me, and that I've been hearing a lot about since my child entered middle school, is the lack of supervision that there is in the bathrooms. And I know as a parent, when my child entered kindergarten, it was shocking to learn that the teachers aren't allowed in the bathroom to help them when they were actually, my daughter was 4 when she entered kindergarten. So it was shocking to hear that 4-year-olds needed to just, be in that space by themselves. And now it's a new space in a way, because now it's a space where kids are doing drugs in the bathroom. And we don't have, I understand the thinking behind keeping adults out of the bathroom would be to protect children from adults who have evil intentions, but I'm a little concerned, have we gotten to the place where the solution has led to the creation of a new problem, where there is no monitoring of the activities that are happening inside of the bathroom? And is it something that, would it be, this is, maybe a question to the central office, like, is there some type of adult monitor that would be possible to have, right, inside school bathrooms, especially in the middle and high schools, so that they can make sure that kids aren't using drugs in the bathroom, and making sure that they're getting back to class on time, and that they're not doing other things that they should not be doing. So has that been a consideration at the central office, to have some type of very vetted adults who are not going to be a problem to the kids, but who could actually be helpful to our kids?
I mean, what I can say to that, Nancy, is at least for in our middle schools, the door bathrooms, you're correct, Camille, the door bathrooms oftentimes are left open because there are stalls for our students to go in. In many of our middle schools, we now have monitors in our halls during that particular transition when students are going into the bathroom, so that we know how long people were in there, how long we have to move people when there's too many people, having some people wait. What we've been doing now is during passing, when people are transitioning from one class to the other, for example, that's a 3-minute or 2-minute period where the door bathrooms are presumably locked, so that students aren't sneaking into the bathroom, hanging out, and then trying to make their way to class, but making sure that they get to class first. And then if they need to go to the bathroom, being let out by a teacher, so that we know how many kids are in a hallway. In the Circular 6, which is part of and you heard that part of the actual presentation around fair student funding, there's that 1.4, because teachers have that additional period. Circular 6 allows for one of the things for hallway monitoring, for example. And so you do have staff members that are in our middle schools, particularly in our middle schools, that are monitoring bathroom usage and number of people in particular bathrooms. I know that the 2 high schools that are under me do that as well, and have been monitoring what's going on and who's in bathrooms and when they're in bathrooms, especially more so now, and particularly one school versus another. But Hewitt can talk about what's happening at the high schools across our district. But I know that for our middle schools, that's definitely something that's happening. I've been to many schools where there are monitors, whether it's a school aide, whether it's a teacher because of their C6 circular in terms of hall monitoring to ensure that enough middle school kids aren't in the hallway. So that is something that we have been doing in our schools to ensure that kids aren't in there for long periods of time. And we actually I've seen people not go in, but call kids out. You need to get out of the bathroom. Let's go. Keep on. You don't have to you're washing your hands for like 10 minutes. What's going on? Like those types of things, we're getting them back into class. Yeah. But in terms of going in the bathroom, yeah, that's a very sensitive topic that I think is at a central level conversation that has to happen. But certainly from a protection of privacy and some other things, there are certain things that we just cannot do.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add on, very similar, thank you, Raphael. The only thing I would add on is it's also on the classroom teachers, right? And at the high school level, managing passing time and transitions is huge, but also, noticing when kids aren't making it to class on time, whether there are patterns or whether they're one-offs. And then Johanna, I see your comment in the chat. We take parents as partners seriously, right? So if you're hearing information from your children, please let the school know. So Johanna, PSC, Jill and Melissa are always available. So I hope that you would feel comfortable reaching out. I believe Melissa is the middle school AP. Please let them know, please work with them, because we have tons of access to your kids and we get one level of information, but we need your help too. So please do that. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, then certainly reach out to Raphael or to Janice and our teams, and let us help you have that conversation.
Yeah. And at the elementary and middle school level, we don't have the SAPIS counselors in every school, but what we've been doing is coordinating with the supervising SAPIS counselor to try to do professional development for students, or not professional development, but training for students in terms of several things. And I know in BHS, we've been talking about the see something, say something, and really trying to get that same message across. I have to tell you that we've been able to stop, I think, 3 incidences in our schools, in our middle schools, as a result of kids being comfortable feeling safe and comfortable enough to share with us something that's going on that we're able to make sure that we can prevent in future incidences that could or could not occur. And so I think it's really about how do we start that track again. I know you had also put into the chat the curriculum for health. Middle school does have to teach health. So there is a curriculum and they do talk about tobacco. But in what Antonia is saying, I don't think it's enough. And I think you would agree with me that it's not enough. It's almost like touching the surface, but not getting into the details enough to letting kids know what the impact of some of these things are going to have on them, not only short term, but long term, and also the consequences as a result of the impact that these things are having. So we'll definitely talk for that.
All right, thank you. Vanessa, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I want to echo what people here are saying, but also my daughter, who is already in college, she experienced and began experiencing all this back in middle school. And what's interesting about this is that exactly what Rafael was mentioning, this starts very early on in middle school and people carry it from there. And there are particular businesses in the district, in the area. I don't know anymore if that is the case. As far as I have seen, as recently as last weekend, some of these businesses were closed down, but there were particular businesses in the district that were resources for students that started drinking or finding drugs, and that they would graduate and move on to high school and come back to the same spaces and, share the news that there are these places where you can find resources that are harmful. So I am glad to hear that there's going to be a cohesive conversation as to how these things affect from middle school to high school and how they move forward, because they're very deeply connected. And I think, Nana, to your point on the pandemic and how things have affected things, I think maybe the impact has been more profound given some of the legalization issues and the access to drugs, but not necessarily to kids consuming, as far as I've experienced with my now high schooler and my college level daughter. So yeah, I just want to thank everyone for raising this issue. It's super important.
Can we also just raise awareness to the social media aspect? Because I think that also influences how much and what people are doing and why they're doing it. When they see access to it, when they see the easy accessibility, when they see other kids doing it on TikTok and all these other platforms, it sends a message that this is what's considered cool. This is what we need to be able to do. And this is what has to happen. And I think that part of that, the responsibility lies on us collectively as a community. Parents have to start checking on what their kids are doing on their phones and allowing certain things versus not certain things and cutting things out. And because I think that social media has had a huge influence on some of these aspects. I agree, Antonia, that part of it are the laws and the relaxing of certain policies as it relates to these particular things and the easy access for students. But I think that the way the social media plays all of this out also continuously influences popularity, and kids in middle school and high school are all about popularity. And part of this has an easy impact and influence on kids being pressured to try something that otherwise they wouldn't want to try or know or want to pick up on. And it's a problem. And I think that also as community members, we have to hold our building permits organizations, our small business organizations, our NYPD responsible for holding these locations accountable for what they're selling, because they also have a responsibility. But the responsibility, when it impacts their profit, is going to go out the window if nobody's checking that they are responsible sellers of these items that are supposed to be for adults and not necessarily children. Rehan shared earlier that 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds are buying some of these things for their relatives. So imagine if a store is doing that, what they're doing when they're open around our schools. I know MS51, for example, has a few vape shops that are close within block range from this from the school. And I certainly know that some of this is being influenced, they're influencing children. So how are we holding those units that are responsible for removing that aspect accountable for enforcing these locations to stop or shut down, lose their permits? And we all have to be vigilant of that.
Thank you. Nakia?
Hi. Okay, so I don't know where to begin, but what I can say, I've been saying this for years, the pandemic, kids have been misusing drugs and alcohol for years. This is not new, okay? What I'm seeing here, so I live in District 13, I'm right across the street from Brooklyn Tech. Brooklyn Tech is riddled with drug use, okay? And this has been going back for years, all right? This is a high performing school. The school administration knows about it, as well as all of the, sex abuse scandals, right? So it matters when we look at the institution. Okay, so Brooklyn Tech has lots of funding. It's a popular school. Every parent wants their high schooler in there. Well, in order for them to achieve, they have to function. The fact that kids can go into bathrooms and snort coke, because let's just be clear, these shops are, causing our kids to become addicted. It is 100% illegal. Okay, so I'm working with kids who use crack. Okay, so there's cocaine out there, there's crack out there. The kids that buy vaping pens or vaping cartridges, they throw away the tobacco cartridges and they go to Carroll Park and they buy the cartridges that are homemade with marijuana and God knows what else. Okay, so these are the issues that we have to look at. The reason why I know this is because I have formed a relationship with kids, right? I am a school. I have experience with school social work. Right now I'm a psychotherapist. I ask the kids what they need, what they're going through. A kid that's happy and everything is going well at home and his social life, is most likely not going to misuse drugs. So what is going on with that child? That child wants to talk, and they always do. And those are the children that tell me what's going on. Kids will take drugs, the bathroom, sure. Kids will take drugs whenever they can. They are experienced. They can go in a hallway and snort quickly. Most of the kids that show up to school are already high because they've gotten high on the way to school. They get high after school. They get high in their friends' homes while their parents are there. Okay, so this is a huge issue. I'm glad we're talking about it finally. But most importantly, I think we have to talk to the kids to find out why. There are kids that are in school withdrawing. Okay, so we're wondering why they're not functioning, why they're having meltdowns. In middle schoolers, our 10, 11, 12-year-olds are having meltdowns because they're withdrawing from something. It's serious, it's heartbreaking. The deeper issue is there and we need to tap into it. The upper middle class families with their children are, in my opinion, from my experience, are experiencing the highest misuse of drugs. And when it's brought to someone's attention, let's say ACS gets involved, right? That's what we don't want. It's such a terrible system where ACS comes in and they go into some wealthy family's home at Warren Hill. And they say, okay, these are the things that are coming up, we have concern. Those kids are being, let's say, abused emotionally. The parents tell them, you can't say that, you got to take it back. So that kid who has shared their experiences now sit in front of an ACS worker and says, I just made it up, I want attention. These are the issues that I'm seeing that I think, from a systemic level are causing our kids to have this much turmoil. Having, extra aides around at school to watch who goes in the bathroom, sure, but they could snort coke at their desk if that's what they choose to do. I think we need more social workers. We need more people, more adults in the schools that understand children, that have experience working with children, that can actually have conversations on their level and not just see them as these helpless, people. They are very skilled at what they do. They know exactly what they're doing. And they need help. They need our support. And it could be, again, just as simple as asking, what's going on? What do you need? And so I can go on because this has been an ongoing issue for me in the work that I do for years, but I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
And Kia, can I just say, and I'm sorry if I'm breaking protocol, we're always, always, always needing the people that you're describing, right? Social workers who want to work in our schools. So if you ever come across folks who are interested in working in, right, Raphael's nodding, at any level, please, please, please let us know. Because you're absolutely right. That's all I want to say.
All right, thank you all, and I pass it back to Camille.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. Sorry. Just pressing and pressing the button here. Yuat, thank you so much. Please send our regards to Superintendent Ross. We'd love to see her if she ever has a chance to stop by sometime, but you're great and very thorough presentation. And thank you for listening to all of our concerns, and hopefully some of these ideas can be implemented sooner than later. So the next item on our agenda was going to be a resolution. We were reviewing a draft on class size matters vote in opposition to raising the New York City charter school cap. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Antonia to talk a little bit more about it.
Okay, so we read this resolution at our last business meeting, and you all had some questions and some, Camille had a few edits. We went back to Lainey and made those changes in the document. One of the changes was, I believe, on page 2 and page 3, there were 2 resolves that were very, very similar. And Lainey did confirm that, yes, that was an error and one of the resolves should be removed. And so the 4th resolved was kept, and then there was a duplicative resolve removed from the 3rd page. And then the other edit that was made was it's transitional aid, not transition aid. And I think that those, and then Camille wanted on page 3, you wanted it to say, be it resolved that all charter schools, oh, be it resolved, where it should say it, hold on a second.
Now we were going to try to combine 2 of those resolves to say
we did
repetitive. Okay.
Yeah, that I went over that. We eliminated the one that Lainey said to eliminate. And then you had wanted, where is it? The 4th resolve from the bottom of page 3. You wanted it to say, be it resolved. Oh, this is confusing. Hold on a second. I can't figure out what it is that was changed before. Hold on. Oh, sorry, it was duplicative. That was the one that was crossed out. You had wanted to edit it, and that was the resolve that we eliminated, I think. Right? I'm sorry, Camille.
Yes, no, that's it.
Yeah, because it's still there.
So, Antonia, I'm
so
sorry, I
anyway,
don't want to rush
I'll
you. I
just-
just want to say it's like 9:29.
Why don't you just read, we have to read it and then give space for comments and that's it. Because we can't vote.
Is everybody okay with that? If anybody needs to drop off, that's fine. Just let us know.
All right, I'll just quickly read it again. All right, draft resolution in opposition to raising the New York City charter school cap and instead in favor of limiting charter costs to the DOE budget and ensuring more oversight and accountability. Whereas Governor Hochul has proposed to allow about 100 additional charter schools in New York City, even though the legal charter cap has been met by eliminating the regional limits and by adding the number of previously authorized charters known as zombie charters, which have closed or had their charters revoked. Whereas if enacted, this proposal could potentially add 300 more charter schools in New York City, since every charter school, whether elementary, middle, or high school, is allowed to expand to all grade levels. Whereas New York City already has 275 charter schools, the vast majority of those authorized in the state. Whereas the total funding diverted from the New York City DOE public school budget is already substantial and growing each year, currently at approximately 2.69 billion, not counting the space and services that co-located New York City charter schools receive for free. Whereas New York City charter schools that are sited in private space also receive subsidies from DOE to help pay for their rental costs that this year totals an estimated 166 million, with 60% of that reimbursable by the state. Whereas the real cost to DOE's budget of charter schools is thus likely over 3 billion annually. This proposal could more than triple the number of charter schools in New York City if the 100 expand to new grade levels, i.e. elementary, middle, or high school. That could cost DOE an additional 3 billion per year or more. New York City is the only school district in the entire state and the entire nation that is obligated to help subsidize the rent for charter schools if they are not provided space in public school buildings. Whereas New York City has been denied over 2.6 billion in state charter school transitional aid between 2011 and 2022. The only school district in the state so exempted, whereas given the need to lower class size according to new state law, which mandates class size reductions starting next fall, charter expansion could deprive our public schools that opportunity. Whereas two Class Size Matters reports on the cost of charter rent in 2019 and 2020 show that in fiscal year 2019, DOE overspent on charter lease costs by over 21 million compared to their legal obligation. And in fiscal year 2020, DOE spent over 11.6 million on rent for charter schools whose buildings were owned by their charter management organizations or other affiliated organizations, and that in some of those cases, the CMO had appeared to sharply increase their own rent, apparently to receive more reimbursement from DOE, whereas 58% of the city's charter schools have lost enrollment over the past 3 years, not including charter schools that opened or closed during that time. Whereas the claims made of high demand and large waiting lists at charter schools are unconfirmed by any independent audits and likely inaccurate, as they include many duplicates. Whereas charter schools, such as those affiliated with Success Academy, spend millions on advertising and marketing efforts in order to recruit more applicants. Whereas a research study revealed that only about 50% of the students who win the lottery to attend Success Academy charters choose to enroll, making their waiting list claims even more dubious, whereas Success Academy was still urging more families to apply to their schools through October of the current school year, revealing a shortage of students in many of their schools, whereas Success recruits students outside the city for their charter schools, revealing a lack of demand in New York City. Whereas many charter schools exhibit high rates of student attrition, including at Success, where 75% of students leave from kindergarten on. About 50% of students who make it to high school leave before graduation. Whereas most New York City charter schools have far lower enrollment rates of high-need students, including English language learners and students with disabilities. Whereas many New York City charter schools are known for their excessive disciplinary policies and pushing out students who do not comply with their strict disciplinary codes. Whereas many New York City charter schools, including those affiliated with Uncommon, KIPP, and Success, have been criticized for their racist practices. Whereas a recent report from the Civil Rights Project at UCLA revealed that charter schools in New York City are even more intensely segregated than district public schools. Therefore, be it resolved that the District 15 Community Education Council strongly urges the legislature to oppose the governor's proposal to increase the number of charter schools in New York City by eliminating the regional caps or allowing authorization of the zombie charters. Be it resolved that instead we urge the legislature to repeal the law that obligates DOE to provide space to charter schools in public schools or help pay for their rent, the only district in the nation with this onerous requirement. Be it resolved that in addition, the legislature shall make New York City eligible for state charter transitional aid from now on and be provided with the $2.62 billion in past transitional aid that was unfairly denied. Be it resolved that the legislature shall eliminate the loophole allowing a charter school to expand to additional grade levels outside of the category that it was originally authorized to serve, whether that be elementary, middle, or high school. Be it resolved that the law should be amended to allow both New York State Comptroller and New York City Comptroller to perform performance audits on the charter sector, including auditing their claims of waiting lists and their practices of pushing out students. Be it resolved that District 15 Community Education Council will ask the New York City Comptroller to audit the DOE spending on rental subsidies for charter schools, especially those whose buildings are owned by their CMO or other affiliated organization, to ensure that they are not inflating reimbursement from the DOE. Be it resolved that the District 15 Community Education Council also asks the New York City Comptroller to audit the spending of DOE on matching funds to public schools co-located with charters for facilities enhancements, an amount that is supposed to match the spending of the co-located charters for that purpose. And yet the CSM reports of 2019 and 2020 found that the co-located public schools were owed millions of dollars by DOE. Be it resolved that the law should require all charter schools to adhere to the same disciplinary and suspension policies that public schools are required to follow under state law. Be it resolved that the law shall require the boards of all charter management organizations to be subject by law to open meetings law. And be it resolved that the following bills to strengthen accountability and transparency of charter schools shall be approved by the legislature and signed into law by the governor, along with the same bills in the assembly. S4200 Hoylman, increasing with transparency and limiting charter co-locations to 3 years. S1395 Lou, providing the Board of Regents with final say over charter approvals and reauthorizations. S2171 Lou, requiring the appointment of an independent fiduciary upon the dissolution of a charter school. S355 Jackson, requiring more accountability for charter schools in multiple ways. S2137 Lou, repealing the requirement that New York City must help pay for private space rented by charter schools. S2173 Salazar, allowing the state comptroller to audit New York City charter schools. And S2292 Mayor, including school districts and in New York City community school districts in the approval process for issuing any new charter schools where the charter enrollment is already above 5% of the total public school enrollment.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments? Don't see any hands raised. Then, Camille, do you have any comments?
I do not. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Antonia, do you have any comments?
No.
Nana, do you have any comments?
No, thank you.
Alfred, do you have any comments?
No, thank you.
Yvonne, do you have any comments?
No comments, thank you.
I have no comments. Vanessa, do you have any comments?
No comments.
Okay, Nakia, do you have any comments?
It's a very thorough resolution. That's all it's that. Fantastic work.
Okay, then I pass the question.
Okay, so we can't vote tonight, so we will just move this to the business meeting agenda and hold the vote then.
Thank you so much. And I just want to remind everybody that we are meeting Thursday night for the school construction authority presentation, and that's going to be a remote meeting as well. Does anybody have anything else they would like to talk about before we adjourn the meeting? And I see two comments in the chat. One from Rayhan, I love this resolution, and then another from Johanna. I also support that resolution and also appreciate you all so much. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We love you too. All right, so if there are no other comments from anybody in the public, just anything at all, if you want to talk about or share any information, just raise your hand. Thank you in the chat. Okay, great. So I guess we'll adjourn this meeting. I want to thank our interpretation team. Thank you so much, everyone. And have a lovely evening. It's 9:43.
Okay, good night.
Good night, everybody.
In the chat.
Take care.
Good night.
Thank you so-
Interpretation, you're dismissed.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.